We'd like to welcome you to this Zoom session with Herb and Dr. Berger. Thank you so much for supporting us here today.
Thanks very much, Melissa. The retreat center has been very, very important to me and my family. My wife went there for a women's day of retreat, and not knowing that it was a gathering of women alcoholics, she went into the meeting to talk about her problems, and she got a lot of feedback. And yeah, it was a big surprise. And as a result of that, she had the courage to go into treatment in 1984 February, and Dr. Berger was the clinical director, and that's where I met him. I went there as an observer to support my wife's recovery. And as I mentioned earlier, I got caught in the draft because they started asking me some questions. Dr. Berger became my therapist after that. I love his information and his personality style. He's a Marine, and he takes the hill. And that's kind of the way I approach life. The mantra in the general 12-step fellowship is easy does it. Sorry, mine is heavy does it. And so is Alan's, I think, by indirect. So he finished his PhD in clinical psychology and has been in a 12-step fellowship for 50 years himself this August. So he can elaborate on any part of that, but we've been therapy relationship and then friend relationship, and then I think we've mentored each other in a variety of ways of expanding our own personal consciousness and ability to be decent human beings, as well as to help other people become decent human beings. Alan, would you like to add something from your standpoint, please?
Well, you often say, how can you get here from there?
Yeah.
And I would say with an awful lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
Well,
I mean,
and that's the truth. Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, he's also a musician.
one of my favorite bands, by the way, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I just love their music. But the thing that you brought to my life, and that I think that you bring so well, is how well you integrate a larger spiritual perspective into the work that we do in recovery. And it's very exciting for me because you introduced me to Father Richard Rohr, and then we started our sojourn in terms of going to workshops. And in fact, God, I forgot what year we did it, but it's probably over 2 decades ago now, Herb. We went to a men's retreat.
Yep.
So, and it wasn't just any men's retreat, it was a male initiation weekend. So the male initiation weekend was to help boys become men. So I will say you are now in a workshop with 2 initiated men.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a remarkable weekend that we had, and confronted a lot of issues that are really relevant in many ways to the work we're doing now with emotional sobriety. And that's why I mention it, because one of the things that we experienced that weekend was a confrontation with our expectations. And there's no greater, I think, benefit than to really look at our expectations and the impact they have on our life, especially how we respond to them. And, this Bill was very clear about this. And I hope you've all read Bill's letter on emotional sobriety, because one of the things that he said is that at the cornerstone of emotional sobriety is what he called humility. And if we understand humility as a low focus on ourself and an accurate, not an overestimate of our success and our worth, and as well as the ability to acknowledge our gaps in knowledge, our mistakes, our shortcomings, then you see that if we have a humble relationship to our expectations, we start to challenge the idea that other people, that the world is supposed to live up to our expectations. And that is a great gift that Bill gave us. He called it unhooking our expectations, surrendering our hobbling expectations of other people. But that only happens is if I realize that I got no business is dumping on you the way I think you should be, the way I think dumping on life, the way I think life should be, and even shooting on myself. So one way to think about emotional sobriety, and we'll be, exploring this and expanding on these concepts today, especially these second 6 concepts, and I'll briefly go over the first 6 here in a minute, is to really understand that it's my relationship to the experience I'm having that is going to determine my happiness and my well-being. It's not what is happening to me. And I cannot emphasize this enough, that it is our relationship to what is happening that determines our happiness and our well-being, not what is happening. An event is just an event. It's the meaning that we give to it is where our growth lies and where there's an opportunity to discover a new possibility. And I think, Herb, I think it'd be safe to say is that the way we approach this whole business of recovery is the discovery of new possibilities in our life.
Yeah. I think what you're capturing also is, it just resonates with me from Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he said, the only thing that I can influence, I can't control anything, but the only thing I can influence, he's in a death camp in 1945. He's a Jewish psychiatrist, so he's got some status there, and he's being taken care of, so he's going to survive, all things being equal, and he did. But he's looking around at all the people in the various levels of survival or not, and assessing, well, what's the difference? He said, the only thing I can influence is my attitude about what's going on. So it's like what you said about your connection to your relationship with life, your relationship with reality. I can only influence my attitude about my current circumstances and the people in it.
Now, if I don't have a humble relationship to my expectations, then what I do is that I demand that you do what I think you should do. And I either move against you and try to control you by taking power over you, by shaming you, by telling you how you should be, or I try to manipulate you by being really nice to you to get you to do what I want you to do. And I move towards you in a pleasing way. And both of those things are to try to control you, or I'll even do that in life, to try to control things to go my way. And see, we never had that thought. And Bill even says that it wasn't our job to control people, places, and things. Our job was to have a different relationship to them. And hopefully that's what we're going to be talking about today, and helping you understand and apply some of this, because it's really important. So, a couple months ago, we did the first of this series of the 12 core concepts. And I just want to go over those for those of you that weren't here, just so you can kind of catch up to where we are. So obviously the first step in anything is waking up. And, Herb and I are big fans of a Russian philosopher by the name of George Gurdjieff, who says that we are a bunch of people asleep, dreaming we're awake. Well, the big question came in, and we explored this before. What has put us to sleep? What does that mean? Gurdjieff used also the analogy that we've been put into a trance. And so we can think of the worldview that we get when we're growing up is putting us in a trance. It's giving us a mindset of how we're going to look at the world and look at our experiences. Other Buddhists will talk about it as our conditioning, right? So we get this worldview, this way of looking at things, and we believe, because it's all we know, that this is what reality is. what I think is normal in my family, I think is normal. And it's not normal. It's just what's true in my family. It doesn't mean that this is the way things are. And so we all get to this place that we're walking around with this conditioning, and we are following these ideas of who we should be, how things should be, and many times without critically challenging any of them. Do you want to say anything about that, Herb?
Yes. So many times, and it's surprising to me, even with people with 20 and 30 years of recovery in one of the 12-step programs, and pretty solid recovery in terms of the normal protocols, they have this fixed need to be right. And it's a need, and actually they really do believe they are right. And that and we say the word so glibly, you and I, Alan, because we've encountered it and experienced it. But I really want to highlight, underscore, put a circle around it, the word should. It reveals to us, and I didn't know this until I did some real analytical work in column 3 of the resentment inventory. It reveals to us our beliefs.
Yes.
And I believed what I believed. Because as you said, in my family or in my experience, this was my norm.
Yes.
I had no criteria to challenge it other than my suffering or other people's suffering, which I just felt was collateral damage. It never occurred to me that it was coming from the fact that I had delusional beliefs through which I was looking as lenses at reality, which corrupted, of course, my perception of reality. But I didn't know that I didn't know, because I'm looking through my lenses, not at my lenses. So that's the whole gift of this journey of looking at emotional sobriety, is we're looking at the lenses through which we look.
Yes.
And seeing the distortions.
So this worldview that I mentioned, that's our lenses, right? That Herb is talking about. It's the worldview. It's the way that we're taught. That worldview is determined by the context of our life. The larger context is our society and the culture that we live in. It's very much a culture that is focused on having, and our capitalism has made us one of the greatest, places to live in our democracy in the world. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. But one of the implications of that is that we view ourselves as commodities, not as people. And now we think of ourselves in terms of marketing. How much are people going to love me and approve me? And what would my going price be on the open market, kind of a deal? It's crazy to think of it that way, but we start relating to ourselves that way. And so we want to mold ourselves into someone that's going to be loved and accepted, which means we're going to try to meet this objective criteria of what beauty is supposed to be, what a successful person is supposed to be. And we drive ourselves. That's the trance I'm telling you guys about, right? That puts us in a trance. And look, there's nothing wrong with having. It just has to be balanced with the other side of the equation, which we don't do well in our culture, is the being side, the spiritual side that we talked about. We forget that character is so important, right? Who we are as a person is as important, maybe more important than what we have. But Eric Fromm, and he had a great insight into all this. He says, in our culture, until we wake up, the idea is I am more the more I have. I am more the more beauty I have. I am more the more the kind of car I have. I am more the more money I have in my bank account. And so now we become obsessed with, we become focused on, that's the goal of life. And if we think if we have everything that we want, we're going to be happy. Well, where's the buzzer? Somebody hit the buzzer. That doesn't happen. I know a lot of people that have a lot of things. They're not happy. That's not how we get to happiness. We're going to talk about happiness today. I'm excited about that we're starting to integrate that into our conversation, because it's such an important thing in terms of life and stuff, is to experience that part of life. So this whole thing, so that's part of it. The context is the culture, but then bring it down to what's more immediate for us, and that's our family. And our family is the instrument that our culture is communicated to us through. They pass on the culture in terms of what they learn, but they also pass on their level of emotional development, how they look at emotions and feelings, how they look at being in this world. And what we say is that we don't grow much beyond the level of emotional maturity that our parents had. And in our culture, the average level of maturity is immaturity. That's the unfortunate. That's not good news, but it's
Right.
not a culture based on wisdom. And Herb and I used to smile when Richard Rohr would tell us that this is not a culture based on wisdom practices. He says, Richard Rohr would tell us, if you want to look at that, just look at where the money is spent.
Yeah.
You know, how much money does a basketball player get? How much money does a teacher get? He says, just look at those two variables. He says, you'll know where the values lie.
Speaking of values, Alan, I was just reading something, and I don't remember exactly where it said the underlying cause of addiction is materialism,
Yeah.
and the underlying resource and source of recovery is humanism.
Yeah.
And what they meant by that was it echoed very much with the letter to Bill Wilson in 1961 from Carl Jung. He said, addicts are uniquely spiritual people. They have this deep hunger, this deep thirst, this deep energy for the spirit with a capital S, and they get distracted by spirits with a small s. It's a brilliant capturing of this inner, you call it organismic life force, that is an energy which we mistranslate into the better car, the better job, the better bank account, the better relationship. And of course, those are all wonderful goals, but they don't satisfy the soul.
They do not help us actualize our potential as a human being.
Right.
And that's what that spiritual force is. It's moving us towards what we can be. I think there's no coincidence that we think of this force as moving us towards wholeness. And we often think of holiness when we think of spirituality. Yeah. And so when you put those two things together, you start to understand that we're always moving towards this. And you can see it, you know, the minute a child is born, the child was completely dependent on mom, right, through the umbilical cord for oxygen, nourishment, for, you know, everything that was provided for us, you know, in the womb. As soon as we're born, we start moving towards what we can be. We take our first act of self-support. And what do? We breathe for ourselves. We take oxygen in and we blow off carbon dioxide. Now we start to support ourselves and our relationship to our environment by participating in getting what we need from life. Well, that's the first step towards our differentiation, towards our maturity. And physically, that's instinctual. Most children, once they're born, they might need a little bit of a pat on the butt. I've needed a lot of pats on the butt, by the way, to get myself going in a lot of areas in life. But, you know, a child at the most needs a little pat on the butt or a pat on the back and clear out, you know, some of the stuff that's in their throat, and they're often breathing. You don't have to teach a child how to breathe. Now, if they're premature, we have to help them until their nervous system matures to that point. The child breathes because the child wants to breathe. The child wants to support him or herself. You don't have to tell a child to do that. You don't have to tell a child to walk when they start to learn how to walk. They want to walk. See, we want to grow to what we can be. The challenge emotionally is it's not instinctual like these other physical milestones are. That's where we need more of a relationship, right? A certain kind of an experience and attachment they talk about a lot nowadays. But we need encouragement to grow us along those lines. And that's what I mean. Unfortunately, we can only learn, from our parents what they know, and it's never enough. It's just never enough. So we become, the way I like to say it, is victims of victims. We become
Right.
victims of victims.
Yeah.
So if everybody's a victim of a victim, there's nobody that's a victim, because we're all victims.
Yeah.
Right? It's that thing. So we become victims of victims. They couldn't have done anything more than they did because they didn't know it. And we can understand that that's true for us. We're doing the best we can with what we have. Doesn't mean more isn't possible and more isn't, necessary. In many cases it is, but a lot of us don't even know that more exists. When I had my trouble back in, so my drinking alcoholically started when I was 12 years old. So that's 1964, right? So if you go back to 64, I was having blackouts at 12 years old. My mom had no idea that there was such a thing as an alcohol rehab center, had no concept that there was something available like an intervention. Today, a lot of parents know that, and they're trying to get their kids help a lot early in life. My mom didn't know that. I'm sure she would have sent me off there if she knew it was possible, because she couldn't wait for me to join the Marine Corps. Maybe they'll fix them. I don't know what to do with them. Let the Marine Corps try to deal with them. And look, thank God I went. It changed my life. But anyway, we're just trying to give you a bit of an idea. That's the sleep part, right? That's the trance we're all in, right? We're in this trance, like what Herb said. Part of the trance could be, I got to be right all the time. I was working with this one family, and I wanted to add this to that part of the discussion. This family was so convinced that if everybody agreed, that they would be able to get along. And so there was such a demand for conformity that everybody think the same way. And so they would fight and quibble with each other incessantly to try to get to the point where everybody should look at this and think about it the same way. There was no room for differences. And that's what they thought love was. That if we all think about it the same way, now our family's close together and we're loving people. Well, they were the most unloving people I've ever met in my life because of this demand. You can't be loving with that kind of a demand, but that was the glasses they had on. That was the worldview, as Herb was saying. So if the worldview is you got to be right to be okay, then what are you going to do? You're going to try to find every possible way to be right and make somebody else wrong. That's the kind of stuff. Now, at some point in time, the second principle we talked about last time is, thank God, we wake up. Gurdjieff talked about the alarm goes off. The alarm starts to ring. Now, most of us have hit snooze many times before we answer the alarm. I did. I was called to waking up before I woke up. I'm sure each and every one of you have been called to wake up at some point in your life before you actually woke up. What is the alarm clock? Early on its life is this feeling I'm not okay. You're feeling insecure and inadequate. You start getting depression or anxiety. You have these feelings you don't know what to deal with. And instead of looking at those as a signal, because that's the way Herb and I really like to talk about this, emotions are signaling devices. It's just like a pain in your knee. If you're feeling something, it just says, hey, take a look at what's going on. There's something wrong. But oftentimes we don't see them that way. We see them as annoyances. We got to get rid of them. Let me take a pill. Let me take a drink, right? Let me get rid of this thing, man. I don't want to feel this. I want to avoid this. I just want to feel what? Good all the time. Oh my God, is that a setup or what? I just want to feel good all the time. So we go off on this, but then that alarm keeps going off. That's the one thing we know, is that because you are wired to move towards wholeness, you will keep creating trouble in your life until you answer the call to that trouble. Because trouble doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It means something's right with you. You are being called to a higher order. You are being called to a higher consciousness. You are being called to your spirituality. What woke you up, Herb? What was the wake up?
Well, there were two things, but just to piggyback on what you're saying there, to wake up to a higher calling, and that's where the transition from steps 9 to 10 take place. Bill says we've entered the world of the spirit. All right, and that's what I believe relationship means: our relationship with life, our relationship with myself, our relationship with other people. Spirituality doesn't have to be mysterious or mystical. It's about relationship. That's my definition of spirituality. And in that area, he says, we've entered the world of the spirit. And in the 12 and 12, he confirms it's a spiritual axiom. Whenever we're disturbed, there's something wrong with us. And in the big book, he counsels what you're saying. Watch for that disturbance. Pay attention, because you're out of alignment. Now, these are my words. They're not words from the big book, but that word alignment is, I think, a synonym for emotional sobriety. I'm in alignment with reality as it is. I acknowledge reality. I accept reality. I adjust to reality, and I take actions that are based on reality, and see how that works. And then I pay attention to how I feel. And I did a lot of work in happiness, and some of that will come out either today or in January when we do some more work in this area. But the bottom line on all of this, the clinical studies that I read, was pay attention to your feelings. If in fact you're experiencing suffering, avoid it. If you're experiencing joy, embrace it. That is about as sophisticated as it doesn't get.
That's
I mean, it's kind of like, oh man, thank you, Harvard. Really? Avoid suffering and embrace joy? No, that's the key to happiness.
But what a recipe for addiction.
Well, exactly.
I mean, you think about, how do you make an addict? Well, take that as the ingredients. Just put that in a pot and boil it in with a little isolation and some shame and trauma, and we're off and running.
And the problem with the addict is we're short-term thinkers rather than long-term actors. And of course, in the short term, our addictions, as the word that you use, soothes the tension and the disturbance. But in the long term, to use Bill's term, it boomerangs and cuts us to pieces. Yeah.
I wanted to read to you just a little portion. NA came out with this wonderful book called Living Clean, and it was published in 2012. And it's just a wonderful book because it's addressing what happens after you get clean and sober. How do you live clean? How do you sustain this? And what are the issues that you confront? And there's a whole chapter on spirituality. And the title of one of the sections of this is that spirituality is practical, which I know, Herb, you would resonate to that because that's how you look at it. It's very practical. It's down here. It's not a mystical thing. It's something that's available for us and that we can use to live our lives. But I wanted to read you this because this, you and I talk about this so much. They say in this chapter, they go, spirituality is a relationship with reality. Isn't that well said? Spirituality is a relationship with reality. As we develop our spiritual lives, we find that reality becomes less frightening, and here's the term you just used a minute ago, and less rigid. See, we don't need things to be the way that we think they're going to be, and we're not afraid of what's going to happen, because before, when I have all these ideas on how things are supposed to be for me to be okay, then I'm walking into every situation with the fear, what if it doesn't turn out? what if it doesn't happen the way I expect it to happen? How am I going to deal with that? Well, not well. That's the problem. That's where then the rigidity comes in. So then I walk into every situation with a certain degree of apprehension. So listen to this again. As we develop our spiritual lives, could also say here, as we develop our emotional sobriety, we find that reality becomes less frightening and less rigid. We learn to live with our freedom. That's what we're striving for here. We come to see that a change in our perspective can totally shift the way we understand our situation. Well, that's what we're talking about today. When Herb says we wake up, we realize that this pair of glasses I've been wearing is getting me to look at things a certain way. And the problem is not what's happening to me, but maybe the way I'm looking at this, the way I'm experiencing this, my relationship to the experience. So now for the first time, we take these glasses off and we say, wow, I'm gonna experiment with a new way of looking at things. I remember when I was writing my book on 12 smart things to do when the booze and drugs are gone. It was my first attempt to discuss some of the ideas and principles of emotional sobriety. I included in this book something Herb shared with me. We're very close and we talk with each other often, and I'd like that to be more often, and hopefully that'll happen as things calm down a little bit in my life. But he was going through a period of time where he was going to see his doctor, and his doctor says, you need to get these cataracts removed from your eye. They're impairing your vision. Now, he did not know that his vision was impaired because the change was so gradual, the growth, on his eyes, that it was now normal, right? It was the experience of normal, just like when our addiction happens in our life. For a lot of us that don't use something like crystal meth, our addiction gradually takes over our life. We don't even realize it. But this was happening to him. He went in for some surgery, and he called me after surgery. He says, oh my God, I just felt physically what the hell we've been talking about emotionally all the time. I've had these cataracts removed, and I always thought, my God, they've really cleaned up LA. Everything looks so much brighter and better out here. And what it was is that lens was taken off of his eyes so that he could see clearly. And I thought
stars returned.
What's that?
The stars returned.
That's what you said to me. There's actually stars in the sky. I was wondering where they went.
Right.
It was such a great, parallel to what we're talking about. So we wake up, something happens. We finally answer the alarm. A divorce happens. Our addiction. We hit bottom. That's why people talk about hitting bottom so much. And you don't hit bottom once. Sometimes you're going to hit bottom many different times in many different areas of your life, because our waking up sometimes goes in phases. We wake up in one area, maybe in relationship to our use of alcohol and drugs and food or whatever it is, then maybe sex. And then we wake up now emotionally. That's the call to emotional sobriety. We wake up and see that how we've been dealing with things emotionally has been determined by our lenses, by our worldview, by our level of emotional maturity. So once we see that, now we make a commitment. That's what step 3 is about. We talk about, right? Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And so in this third concept Herb and I talked about last time is we strive to grow up. We strive to grow ourselves up. Now we see that our problems have been of our own making. There isn't a more clearer statement in terms of what our dilemma is than that statement in the big book, Herb. What would you like to say about that?
So many people resist it until they spend some time with it. And the key that unlocked the door for me was to deal with somebody, to have some mentorship, some guidance from somebody who had the experience and knew that I didn't have the experience and was willing to spend a lot of time and patience asking me some questions and giving me some direction concerning some writing to do with regard to my life and my inventory and my history, to wake up, because I couldn't see that I didn't see. And that's the only way I can phrase it in retrospect. It was inventory the first time where they said, I mean, not inventory in the classic sense, but it said, what is your history with your drinking? Do a bullet point. And when I wrote it out, I began to intuit a pattern, but then they had me read it out loud. Sound like a familiar process, fourth and fifth step, but it wasn't. It was the hospital program. And in the reading it out loud, it just overwhelmed me. The dots were connected for the first time. And I go, wow, I really have a problem with alcohol. I'm 43 years old. I've had a completely reflective, powerful education all the way up to that point, and I had never seen it. I wasn't shocked that I was alcoholic. I was shocked that I had never seen it. And then the next moment, 4 years later, of an awakening is I sat in front of a man. Again, I want to emphasize, be with wisdom people. Alan used that word earlier. People who have some information, but also have some experience. And he said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. I'm 4 years sober. He said, you've got a lot of academic knowledge, but it's never filtered through your heart to your feet. He said, you think you're a Renaissance man. You're actually a Neanderthal. I was willing to take all of that abuse. Of course, I'm in therapy with Dr. Berger, and he photocopies a page from his DSM on narcissism and says that there are 9 characteristics. Take a look at those. And he said, the only thing missing is your picture. So there you go. A little self-revelation there. I hope that's in good taste.
It is in good taste. And please, I don't do that with everybody. It is not a standard technique in psychology to do that. But, you guys see who Herb is. He's a sturdy guy, and he's really committed to his journey. So he's ready to look at things. And look, I've said it millions of times, and people like Herb, have taught me this, is only the best in you can look at the worst in you. Only the best in you can look at the worst in you. And when we start seeing things that have caused us so much pain, so much suffering, that's the best in us looking at those, so we can start to deal with them and start to address these things and start to find discover a new possibility for ourselves. And as Bill said, once we start to grow along these lines, it's infectious. It's not just about us, but those about us begin to benefit tremendously. And if you saw what I saw that happened in Herb's family, you'd know exactly what I mean by that. It's unbelievable. Recovery is, the disease is a family disease, and recovery is a family event. I mean, it really is. It's a family experience. All right. So our third thing is that, second thing was we wake up, we realize we're asleep, we wake up. Now we commit ourselves to our growth and to our development. And the thing, as we commit ourselves to our growth and our development, we start to see this emotional dependence that Bill is talking about, how it has woven itself into our lives and has helped us not be able to grow along spiritual lines. Because see, when my well-being and my emotions are so dependent, my sense of self is so dependent on other people and what happens around me, I lose a sense of the part I need to play in my life. So now I start hoping that you'll be the answer to my dilemma, that you'll be what I need you to be. That Susie may be the woman I need, that if she comes in my life, she'll just make things perfect, or whomever it is, right? Or if I get this job will do it, right? Or this promotion, I know if I get this promotion, I'm going to be okay. But then we come to a realization that no one is coming, no thing is coming, nothing's going to come along in our life and make us better. Nathaniel Brandon, a brilliant psychologist, had this above his door in his office in Beverly Hills. He said, no one is coming. so that when his patients were in there and and working on their self-esteem, that they realized that they needed to now start to show up for themselves in a very different way in their life if things were going to change. I love what you added to this. No one is coming. What's the second half of that, Herb?
I am the one I am waiting for. Oh my God, what a discovery that was. I mean, I was 48 years old. I have a graduate education in philosophy, psychology, and theology. I was 4 years sober. I mean, I know some stuff. And at 48 years old, I begin to wake up because of this. It was amazing, just amazing.
And it was a true transformation for you, as we talk about, if you don't transform it, that you go ahead, if we don't take our issues and transform it, we transmit it, it becomes infectious, as I said, and people around us are impacted by what we do. But when we transform it, we also transmit that. And that's the good news. I love the title of your second book. Tell everybody the title of your second book if they haven't seen it already.
12 Steps to Spiritual Awakening. And the subtitle is Enlightenment for Everyone. Because Bill had this prophetic vision in 1939 when he published the first edition to the Big Book. 1939, he publishes the very first edition to the Big Book. And in the preface, in the first paragraph, in the last line of that first paragraph, he said, "Our way of living may have its advantages for all." All human beings is what he meant, because the 12-step process is a methodology built specifically for the human being. Yes, the addict, absolutely. Yes, the alcoholic, more specifically. But when you apply these general principles to the relationship with life, to the relationship with yourself, and to the relationship with other people, you're changed. And that's the definition of a spiritual awakening. I think, in fact, I've just become aware of it in this conversation, Alan. I became awake and transformed and spiritually awake based on that 12-step definition right around that time, around age 50. And that was the time that we began going to Richard Rohr. And so we were prepared to have the rite of passage, which was that next step into emotional sobriety, but we didn't have that vocabulary at that time.
Not at all. I don't even think we were banning that term around much.
No, we were not.
No. Right?
It was after our rite of passage that we began to wake up to, in fact, that whole concept. So I guess what we're indicating here, not that our history is that interesting to you, but that this is a process.
Yeah.
And part of the word I use is I thawed out. And it took me a long time in the rooms to thaw out enough to actually do the steps. I thawed out on the outside, and with the steps, I thawed out on the inside. And it's a continuous process of thawing out because there's more light to dispel the darkness. And I've been using that metaphor recently a lot because it's just so graphic. And that's what spirituality is. It's not fancy, it's not mystical. It's just there's darkness and the light will diminish and dispel, and we are attracted to go toward the light. That's that energy. You talked about the best in us manages the worst in us. I mean, that just is so practical. And it's also very reinforcing and perhaps relieves us a little bit of some of the guilt and the shame and some of that negative thinking that has been our culture or our family of origin or our predisposition or our conditioning over time. To realize that as the Buddhist monk said, there's two wolves inside of each of us, a white wolf and a dark wolf. And the student says, which one wins? And the master just smiles and says, the one you feed the most. I mean, that's a very graphic, yeah.
No, it's so powerful. So just to review, all right. So number one was we realize we're asleep, we wake up, we commit ourselves to growing ourselves up, right? That's Recovery is a people growing process, and we're engaged in it. And part of that growing up means no one is coming, right? That I've got it. I'm the one I've been waiting for. I need to show up for myself.
That was the essence of my awakening, that I am 100% responsible for my life. I am not a victim. Oh, was I victimized? Absolutely, in many, many arenas. But I am not, as I'm articulating it, a victim today. Yes, my history has it, but that doesn't define me today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and you worked really hard on the trauma you had.
Yeah.
And the things that victimized you. It just didn't go away, folks. I mean,
Right.
you know, the thing that I want everybody to know is that Herb's recovery, my sponsor, Tom, if he was here, he'd say the same thing, is a result of using psychotherapy to deal with what psychotherapy is great for. Increasing awareness, dealing with trauma issues, right? Those kinds of things it's remarkable for. And then when you integrate that into the context of the 12-step work, it's remarkable, the result. It's synergistic. It's 1 + 1 = 10, not just 2.
No, that's the spiritual math. That's right.
That is.
That's why I say you can't get here from there, and yet here I am.
But it does not just happen to you. I mean, it does happen to you. But what I mean by that is that it takes the willingness to do this stuff. And Bill talked about this.
Right.
He says we give willpower a bad rap in this program, right? But it's also the thing that's going to help us turn our lives around, is the commitment to our recovery and how we show up and working these things, not just being around the program, but getting into the program.
Yeah.
Getting into your life. And so that's what leads us to this fifth, thing. Now that we realize no one is coming, now we strive to take responsibility for our existence and understand that we've created our existence. And if I've created it, I can create another alternative. And we do that by raising the level of our consciousness and awareness. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of increasing your awareness. Even if you did it by just 5% every day, that 5% would yield 1,000% improvement in your life. Rumi had a great poem that went, how with one rose can you get a garden of roses? And that's what happens in recovery. With one rose, we get a whole garden. And that's what's possible here. As you increase your awareness, you not only become aware of who you're not, which is important, but you can become aware of who you can be. See, that's the exciting part. That's what keeps me hooked with this program and so excited about it. Each day, there's a new opportunity to discover something new on this journey.
The metaphor that I use in that, staying with the light in the darkness, is the dimmer switch. It goes up a notch at a time. If I have my shoulder gently pressed against it, moving it forward. Harry Tiebout, the psychiatrist that worked with Bill Wilson, said, Bill got it right. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at depth, but the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. And Bill said, that's why we have a daily reprieve. We're not cured. It means this application of 10, 11, and 12. These are the tools for our way of life, leaning gently against the light. And as the dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time, the lights get brighter. The good news is with brighter lights, you can see more. The bad news is with brighter lights, you can see more. Exactly.
But as the lights get brighter, now what happens in the next core concept? So we're at the 6 core concepts we talked about last time. We begin to accept that life is not going to conform to our expectations. We see that it's going to be our job to deal with what we experience, that life is not going to be the way we want it to be, so we feel good. So now we get down in the trenches, and now our recovery becomes very practical. How do I deal with this resentment that I feel? How do I deal with my anger? How do I deal with this emotional storm? How do I deal with my anxiety? How do I deal with my depression? How do I deal with my trauma? And now we start to dig into what we have to dig into to get to a point where we learn how to recover our balance, right? How to recover our balance quickly when we lose it. And that's the essence of emotional sobriety. It's not like everything's going to be all right, but emotional sobriety is how to get to all right, right? Quickly in our lives.
This is where I use the term alignment, and I'd like to have people look at my screen right now, because the life force that Dr. Berger talks about, that organismic life force, and every once in a while he'll put a picture up with the acorn and an oak tree. How does the acorn get to the oak tree? Because there's an organismic life force. And step 3 is about acknowledging I have free will, and it's my responsibility, and it's only my responsibility. I'm the one I'm waiting for to turn to be in alignment with the life force, acknowledging there is a life force, acknowledging I have free will, and I have a responsibility to turn. Step 3 is not passive, it's ferociously active to be in alignment with reality. This is steps 4 through 9 that brings us through the turning. Of course, as Dr. Berger mentioned, spiritual math, we can't get here from there, but if in fact we follow these suggestions, we're taken there. Hear that, please. Willing to follow directions, we are taken to a place that we don't even know exists and can't achieve on our own. And that's a spiritual awakening by definition, done to us, not by us, but not without us. And so when we get to that step 10, when we're talking about reality, we're talking about emotional sobriety, that one word alignment for me has really broken the code and made it so easy. If I'm suffering, I'm out of alignment. If I'm in joy, I'm in alignment. It's, for me, it's really that simple. Alan.
So that's the first 6 concepts we talked about. That's what we did last time. And please, if you'd like to hear the whole program, go back and listen to it, because it's as you can tell from just the summary of it, it's a powerful discussion. So that brings us to core concept number 7, and that's where we're going to start today's workshop from. So is there anything you want to say about those before we move on to 7, Herb?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, great. Then let me go share my screen now with you, and we will dig right into core concept number 7. Okay, so this is number 7. We strive to meet life on life's terms and align ourselves with reality. It goes along the lines with what Herb was just saying. Our problem is reality happens, and then we object to it. That's the being at cross purposes. It's not what we expect it to be. It's not what we want it to be. It's not what we would like it to be. You know, we feel at times that life is unfair. How many times have you heard people say that? How many times have you said that to yourself? Life is unfair. I have replaced the word unfair with unfortunate.
Yeah, so it's much healthier. I really like that, Alan. I've adopted it myself.
You know, it's just such a better way. This is an unfortunate situation. I remember a young man I worked with that had diabetes, and he felt it was so unfair, and he was just in these pity parties all the time because of all of the dietary restrictions and other things that he had, and he was victimized by his diabetes. And his concept, his view, once again, his glasses said, his worldview said, this is unfair. You're not supposed to have this. His expectation was he should be normal, that he's entitled to be normal. If you're born, you're entitled to be normal. Now, where does that idea come from? Well, your worldview. That's where it comes from, the way you look at things. As soon as he did a piece of work with me and got to that, instead of, and it came to me when he was doing this work, I said, why don't you try something on? Instead of saying that it's unfair, why don't you see what it means to you to say it's unfortunate? My God, it changed his whole attitude towards his experience. Now it was a matter of learning to deal with what was going on, not objecting to it. And that's the gift of getting aligned with reality.
One of the men in my workshop at one point, right in the middle of the workshop, just stood up because he'd had an epiphany right there. He said, Herb. I said, what, Jason? He said, reality is not personal.
Oh, so good. So good.
I mean, it was like we were somewhere in the
so
fourth step, I'm sure.
Yeah, I
He
love
said,
it.
oh my God, life is not personal. It just is. I'm the one that makes it personal. I was doing a little writing the other day in a reflection, and in this area, I said, reality is absolute, but our perception is relative.
Yeah.
So for instance, a deer going to the lake to have a drink of water is a good thing. The mountain lion coming up behind the deer and eating the deer is a bad thing for the deer, but a good thing for the lion. Yeah. I don't mean that everything is relative. I absolutely do not mean that, but our perception is not absolute. Our perceptions are relative. Thank you.
Well, and Virginia Satir captured this. And see, that's the exciting thing that I found about emotional sobriety. If you follow my work, you'll see how I try to integrate many of the masters of psychotherapy and their work and their concepts into what we're talking about, because Herb and I have discovered that this idea has been manifesting itself in many different ways, in many different theories, from a lot of different perspectives, but in one way, they're all on the same page. This is the way Virginia Satir says, life is not what it's supposed to be. It is what it is. Take that into your meditation. Life is what it is. It's the way you cope with it is what makes the difference in your life. How do we cope better? So it's a matter of how do I show up and now deal with what's going on? Well, if I'm not examining my expectations and if I'm hung up that it's supposed to be a certain way, my ability to cope is impaired. Expectations impair our ability to cope unless they become aligned with reality.
Yeah.
I remember this one client I was having was talking about a family therapy session they were having with a parent that they didn't know how to deal with. And the family therapist turned to them and said, I figured out what the problem is here. And they were very interested. Oh my God, tell us what. You guys don't expect what you expect. Think about that for a minute. They knew their mom was narcissistic and self-centered. And yet they kept going to her, hoping that someday she would see the light and change.
But that is the definition of insanity.
It is, but isn't it funny to say it that way? You don't expect what you really expect to happen. You know who that person is, but you're not accepting it. And that's the core of this.
Because it shouldn't be that way.
That's right. You should be loving and selfless. Your mom, of course, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And as you've said so many times, the real insanity is not only do we expect it to be okay, we actually expect it to be better this time, which is, on steroids.
Now, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which Herb referred to earlier, which was written in 1959, this is what Viktor Frankl said as a summary of what he learned while he was in the death camp. And what he saw that the men had to do to survive the experience they were having. Now, what I say in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, is if this works in a death camp, it's going to work in your life. It's going to work under any conditions, whatever. And so this is what he said. He says, we had to learn ourselves. Now, listen to this, because it sounds like they had an AA meeting in the death camp. We had to learn ourselves. And furthermore, we had to teach the despairing men that it did not really matter what we expected from life. There goes the deconstruction of the expectations. It really did not matter what we expected from life, but rather we had to see ourselves, as what life expected from us. We needed to think of ourselves as those who were being questioned Another way to think about it is challenged by life. And that life ultimately means taking the responsibility, hear that term again, that we have to take the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems, to the problems that life presents us with, and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. The task being, how best can I respond to the event that's happening to best take care of myself, given what's going on?
Many people have heard me talk about the serenity prayer, which I've really fallen in love with. Several years ago, I stopped using the word control because I realized, having done some work, that I don't have any control outside of me or inside of me. I mean, control in the truest sense of the term control. I don't have control. I have the influence. And the serenity prayer is that prayer. What can I influence? What can't I influence? And the understanding of that, the experience of that, that's the wisdom that prayer is about. Wisdom comes from making decisions, taking actions, making mistakes, and taking corrective actions. We then understand what works and what does not work. If we're open to what Dr. Berger is just talking about, that reality doesn't conform to my expectations. I need to adjust to reality as it manifests. If you don't hear anything other than that, and you will hear many things, but that's the key to happiness. That's the key to serenity. That's the key to a life well lived, is I need to adjust to reality. It doesn't mean I have to roll over and be a doormat, not one bit. I mean, I think Dr. Berger and I are witness to that. There's no doormats here.
Yeah. No, I was sharing with someone the other day. I was doing some more research on, I just recently was looking more at this whole issue of differentiation. And, we'll talk somewhat about that in future workshops. We'll even talk more about it. But differentiation was this concept that Dr. Murray Bowen discovered, or really applied to psychology, because it was a concept that was in biology for a long time, cell differentiation. And he applied some of that, the concept of it, to our emotional maturity, in that as you become more differentiated, you become more emotionally mature. And he defined that, and listen to this definition because it's brilliant. It fits along the lines with what Herb was just saying. A person who is well differentiated will act for themselves without being selfish. They will act for themselves without being selfish, and also act for others without being selfless. They find the balance. They find the balance between individuality and togetherness. And that's what we have been talking about. Bill even mentioned that emotional sobriety has to do with real maturity and balance. That's the balance he was talking about. And this is the way we get towards that. Now my job is to deal with what's happening with me, not to sit there and get upset about it and object to it. This shouldn't be happening. It is happening. Now what's my best response? This is why Bill said that as we progress in our recovery, the word blame gets taken out of our language. It no longer has any relevance. It is completely irrelevant whose fault this is. What's relevant is, this is what's happening. How do I deal with it? Such an important perspective.
Well, and that's a real healthy operating principle. This is what's happening. Now, how do I deal with it?
And we're not saying it's good or bad.
No,
we're not putting a judgment on it.
no.
We are just saying it is what it is. In fact, in some way, we are suspending our judgment of it. And we're saying, now, what's my best possible response to this?
It's not what I wanted. It's not what I expect, but here it is.
And it's not what I wanted, but it is what I am now confronted to deal with. And how do I best deal with it?
Yeah.
So Fritz Perls, who was the founder of Gestalt therapy, had a statement that used to baffle me. because at first it didn't make sense, but the more and more that I got into this stuff on emotional sobriety, the more wisdom I saw it. He says, the real secret for someone is to let the situation they're in control them instead of trying to control it. And he says, if you let the situation you're in control you, then you learn how to cope with life. Then you learn how to deal with things. Then you learn how to grow up. And what he meant is that my job in any situation I'm in is to see what's the best way to deal with what is happening. So I can only do that by allowing the situation to understand the situation and accept the situation as it is. Now the situation is going to determine my response. If I have only 3 choices, I have to look at those 3 choices instead of hoping that there would be a choice number 4.
Yeah, right.
Right. See, so now my job is, of these 3 possibilities, unless I can discover a 4th that maybe is there that I didn't see, and nobody, and sometimes I do that. But if there's not, now which of these 3 is in my best interest? We talk oftentimes about a 2-choice dilemma. And I want to mention that briefly based on what we just talked. A 2-choice dilemma is when you have 2 real shitty choices, and neither one of them is dilemma free. Let's say you're in a relationship and it's not what you want. You're considering divorce. If you stay, it's not a good thing for you. If you divorce, it's going to be fraught with a lot of challenges and a lot of pain and a lot of issues and a lot of anxiety. Both choices create a dilemma. How do you deal with that? Well, what a lot of people do is they avoid it. I'm not going to make a decision. Well, not making a decision is what? Making a decision not to make a decision. It keeps you in the situation, so you don't avoid it that way. There's no avoiding anything. You're still confronting or dealing with the same thing. You're just not taking responsibility for what you want to do. So what people often can do to deal with a 2-choice dilemma is to think, instead of what the outcome is going to be, because this is where we get hung up. If I say, well, I'm going to leave and my life will be better, maybe or maybe not, we don't know. That's going to be determined by what you do. And if you stay, it doesn't mean it's going to get worse, because maybe you're going to stay and you're going to find out, I got to find a way to deal with some of these things that I haven't known how to deal with, and I'm going to get help. But if you stay or if you go, the issue becomes being committed to, this is my choice at this point in time, and making the best of that choice. See, that's how people get out of it, not by projecting a certain outcome in the future, because that's how people want to make a decision. I will do this if it's going to be better. But we don't know if it's going to be better. We can know how we're going to show up regardless of what it is. You know, if it's not better, I'll deal with that. If it's better, I'll enjoy it. But it's not based on whether it's better or not. This is what I want. And you're going to hear us come back to that many times.
One of the staple recommendations I have for the people I work with is, when you have that kind of decision fork in the road, is determine the principle. Find what is underneath the principle. Always apply the principle, and always take the high road, and always be generous. And it's never failed me to define what your values are, to look at what the benefits you're looking for, but underneath to get as clear as you can with the principle that's going to be the operating principle to make the decision. Take the high road, be generous. And of course, I always recommend that people use a wisdom person as a sounding board for testing out all of this stuff. Also, people with knowledge and people with experience, wherever you might find that.
That's right on. Very good. Okay, core concept number 8. Get ready for it. Here it is. We show up differently in our lives. We disrupt old patterns and experiment with new ways of thinking and behaving. This gets to the flexibility that Herb was referring to before. You see, part of emotional sobriety is being able to become aware of those habits and patterns that exist in our life. Those habits and patterns that came from our conditioning, that came from the way that we grew up, the way that we, that way our personality unfolded and developed in life. And by becoming aware of these things, I now then have a choice to try on things differently. And so that's why we emphasize so much in awareness by saying, my God, look, I get mad in every situation that I'm confronting. How come my first response is always to get anger or always to get angry? What is it about anger that pushes forward as my response when I'm frustrated and things don't go my way? See, that kind of an inquiry, and that's what we're going to be talking about. When you ask, and I love this, Herb said this so many times, and I've always loved and resonated with this. The better questions you ask, the better information you're going to get. When you ask, what is my habit here? What is the pattern to my behavior? When you start to put that into your consciousness and start looking at yourself, you will start to see the pattern. You will start to see the habit. I can give you one example. For when my father died when I was 11 years old, all of the adults around me went into themselves. And I felt very much abandoned. I felt isolated. I felt on my own. And of course, what I saw in terms of how you cope with things is to do what? Well, everybody went into themselves. So what do you think I did? I went into myself. There was nobody that asked me how I felt or what was going on. And nor did I go to anybody and say, hey, I'm in pain. This is a terrible situation for me. I learned that when you're in trouble, you have to deal with it by yourself. Big habit and big pattern in my life. Never talked about any of this stuff. And I remember I went to Vietnam in 1970, came back in 71. I'm a Vietnam combat veteran. And I remember my recovery started in 71 with Tom. And he said to me, I thought it was very interesting that the first 10 years I knew you in your recovery, you never talked about anything that happened to you in Vietnam. Same pattern. I kept all of that pain and trauma that I experienced over there to myself. I was just going to deal with it. Finally, one day that opened up. Finally, I started to be able to talk about it, but I realized I did the same thing I saw my father do with his cancer. He died from multiple myeloma. He suffered a terrible death. And in the year I watched him die, he never talked about it once. I saw him suffer it, but he never gave words to it. He never talked about how bad it was. He never talked about what it was going to mean to him to leave his family at 39 years old and the 4 children he loved dearly. And this woman that was the love of his life, and her great lasagna and meatballs and spaghetti. I mean, all of that, he loved his life. And here at 39, he was dying. Never talked about it once. Nothing. He suffered in silence. My God, did that become a pattern in my life? Of course it did.
At the same time, Alan, the question and the topic that you're talking about, that's what I referred to at the beginning when the hospital said to me, who I'm there to support my wife's recovery. And they said, why don't you take a look at your history of drinking, your relationship with alcohol? They kept it very, they didn't tell me I had a problem. They said, they asked me this question. I'd never been asked the question before. What's your history? He said, don't write out sentences. Don't write out a script or a story. Just put bullet points based on years and or months of what's behaviorally has been your experience. Behaviorally, bullet points. And when I wrote it out, as I said, I saw a pattern. When I read it out, it was the beginning. It cracked me open. The question, not the answer. They didn't tell me anything. They didn't give me any knowledge. They didn't confront me. They just asked me gently to ask myself this question, and it opened me up. So that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, and it's so powerful that, what you saw as you looked at that, you saw this pattern. Now, the other thing that I want you to hear from us today is that recovery is about trying things on to see how they work for you,
Right.
and trying things on that are different than what you've been doing. I don't know what's going to exactly work for you, but I know if you take an experimental attitude into your recovery and say, try it on and see what you experience, you're going to discover new possibilities. I did. When I started to share some of the things that were inside me that I held inside, I realized the freedom that gave me. What did Maslow say? The truth will set you free, but only if you have the courage to live it. And we have to take that courage to step out of our comfort zone and try new things on. And that's why we got to become aware of our patterns to try it on differently.
Well, and that's why the 12-step process has three inventories. Step 4, the mother of all. Step 10, the daily spot check. And step 11, the nightly review. Because Bill is suggesting this radar sweep of what's the pattern of our discomfort, our disturbance, our tension, because he knows that tension inevitably will get taken care of by our addiction unless we have alternative solutions.
Right on. So this is what we realize, as we see the pattern, one of the patterns, if we really sit down and look at our lives, is this emotional dependence and how it shows up. This is the way that Fritz describes it. He says our dependency, you can replace that with our emotional dependency, make slaves out of us, especially if this dependency is a dependency of our self-esteem. We talk all the time about how we suffer from other validated self-esteem. We are okay if other people say we are okay. That's the other validated nature, that life becomes an I'm okay if life, a life based on contingencies. If you need encouragement, if you need praise and pats on the back from everybody, then you turn everyone into your judge. You turn everyone into a parent. You turn everyone into you, or the way we like to think about it is you give everyone your strings and you become their puppet. And now you are living on your approval or disapproval from them, that you're so focused on how they feel about you. This is the pattern that needs to be seen and understood if you're going to achieve emotional sobriety.
And that was the most startling picture that I had when I first began really doing effective inventory, that I was a puppet on strings to people and circumstances. They determined how I felt on a 24/7 basis, circumstances and people. And once I had finished doing that work, those strings were cut. And as you said, that center of gravity, it's a great term. That center of gravity is deep down now in myself. I determine how I feel. I determine how I think. I determine how I act. And I'm 100% responsible for the outcome. That's the catch-22.
There it is. That's right. And that's good news and bad news, right?
Exactly.
Good news and bad news. But what it does do, regardless of whether it's good news or bad news, it creates freedom. See, that's the freedom. We are no longer controlled by these things, by this desire to be loved and liked and all this other stuff. Bill called about these adolescent urges. We can think of them as very infantile urges, right? That we may have needed that as children, but we're no longer children. Now we're adults and we need to learn what that means. And I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, Bill uses that metaphor in step 6 and 7 in the 12 and 12. He said, this is the process that brings us from childhood to adulthood. That rite of passage that we were talking about earlier.
So this is Eric Fromm. I'm a big fan of his. So he's talking about what happens early on in life and how we kind of come to grips with this anxiety about not being loved and not being accepted, right? Where this emotional dependency starts to grow. He goes, we save ourselves by developing, this is a new term for us, Herb, by developing a secondary sense of self. It's a secondary sense of self because it's a false self that's based on this other validated self. So he goes, we do this by experiencing ourselves as being approved of by somebody else telling us we're worthwhile, we're successful, we're useful. So our center of emotional gravity that Herb just talked about is placed outside of ourselves. Our worth is depending on how other people view us. It's not depending on us. So now we're the string, we're the puppet on the end of those strings, and we've put ourselves there. It's not like, we can say, yes, our culture puts us there, our families teach us that, of course. But ultimately, I got to say, I tied the strings onto myself,
right,
to become the puppet. And if I've tied them, I can untie them. That's what we want to get to, is that sense of ourselves. This is Dr. Karen Horney, and she just says this so brilliantly. She goes, the therapeutic value, we could say the spiritual value in the disillusioning process. The disillusioning process is becoming disillusioned with our illusions, that somebody else is going to come along and make us okay. We become disillusioned that our emotional dependence is somehow a good foundation for life. We realize that doesn't work. She goes, the therapeutic value in the disillusioning process lies in the possibility that with the weakening of the obstructive forces, this is that infantile, right, need to be loved and liked, this idea of letting that go, seeing that we're more than our false self. With weakening that, then the constructive forces of our real selves have a chance to grow. Now, our true nature that got us to take a breath when we were first born, that wants us to support ourselves, that wanted us to walk, can now come into play, and we can learn how to stand on our own 2 feet and take care of ourselves emotionally.
It's very, go ahead, Al.
No, that's it. I just say, what an incredible process.
It's very countercultural, and that's why it's so difficult, and that's why most people don't do it. We grow up in a culture that we absorb subliminally. We just absorb it. Yeah. Disney's had a huge role in the fantasy about what a relationship is and that somebody's coming. The cavalry's coming, the prince is coming, the fairy godmother's coming, magic sprinkle dust is coming. I mean, there's going to be a magical solution. All right, or advertising. I mean, with the sophistication of psychology and the understanding of human behavior, advertising is absolutely pernicious.
Yes.
In terms of I feel so sorry for women, especially you in a checkout stand, you go by the magazine rack and you see what the ideals are on the covers of all these magazines, and it's got to drive people crazy. Or the whole area of conditioned behavior, it's perverse. I mean, we're all Pavlov's dog. We've been trained to salivate at emptiness. That's that materialism that I was talking about earlier.
All right, this is you, Herb.
And the way of life that Bill points for us, I mean, that's the term he uses. One of the reasons I like Buddhism is that it has no rules. I mean, as I understand it, I'm a dilettante in the area. I'm not a practicing Buddhist. I'm exposed to the learning and teaching and reading of Buddhism because it's the most parallel to the 12-step process with no rules, and they call it a way of life. Bill introduces us to that in the transition between steps 9 and 10. He says, we enter the world of the spirit. We commence this way of living. And he says, these promises will always occur page 84, please reread it. These promises that he just articulated on pages 83 and 84 will always manifest if we work for them. This brings us to the ingredients to the way of life. Step 10, keeping our channel clear. That life force that is in us, keeping the channel, the impediments, the darkness at a minimal level so that the life force can flow in us and through us, and that we can consciously improve the relationship with light or life force or life flow in our prayer and meditation practice. And that as a result of that, we will empty the channel through the cracks in us, those wounds in us that have been healed through the process, but that makes us available to helping other people with the same kinds of wounds. And I've heard the term wounded healers. All right, there's a wonderful song, and I don't know the name of it or the singer, Alan might, talks about that the light comes into us and shines out through the cracks in us to other people. That's the way of life Bill is describing. A life of inventory, that we watch for disturbances, that we sit in the morning and get guidance, and at night we see how a radar sweep can remove those disturbances, and that we have 24/7 this attitude, how can I help? That's why I love the definition of the term altruism. There's so many definitions and application of the word love that it becomes quite meaningless until I looked at that word, altruism, doing something for the benefit of somebody else without any possible benefit for myself, coming as close as at least I've seen in terms of unconditional love. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, it's such a powerful thing, because now let's put this in context and go back a little earlier in the steps. See, in step 6 and 7, what we're doing is we're really shifting, we're pivoting now towards developing the best possible attitude that we can have towards life. See, this is the pivot towards emotional sobriety, because Bill says, look, if you practice all 12 of these principles in your daily lives, and then we and those among us or about us begin to achieve emotional sobriety. So the goal of the steps is to help you achieve emotional sobriety. Let's be very clear about this. So in 6 and 7 here, I've looked at my we call them, I like to think of them as character defaults, not defects anymore, but we looked at our character defaults. We looked at the way that we get in the way of our life, our toxic attitudes, the things that we do to diminish our experience. That's all becomes clear. And then we pivot towards now adopting a whole new way of living life, the best possible attitude, Bill called it, the best possible attitude towards ourselves, towards our fellows, towards life, towards our relationship with God as we understand it. Now in 8 and 9, we're still kind of cleaning house, right? We're kind of taking responsibility. But what we're learning in shifting to that best possible attitude is 8 says, if things are going to work better in my life, I have to start by taking responsibility for what I'm doing. Step 8 is a radical responsibility step. Wouldn't you describe it like that, Herb?
Absolutely.
Taking radical responsibility.
Yes.
I am responsible for, made a list of those people that we have harmed, become willing to make amends to them. I'm responsible for what I've done, and I'm responsible to take care of it and address it.
I am contagious.
That's right. I am contagious.
A word that we can all
I'm going to put the mask on, right? It's that thing. I'm going to wear the mask. So we're doing that 8 and 9. And then in step 9, we go and we now take what the responsibility that we've realized that we have and what we've done wrong, and we try to make amends, right? We go to those people that we have only when not to hurt them or not to do what we do would hurt them more. So we realize we can't get well at somebody else's expense. We're as important as everybody else, not more and not less, right? That's what we're learning. A whole new attitude that I respect myself and I respect you. It's equal, right? I'm no better than and no less than. It's that I to thou relationship. We've switched that. That's what we did. So now we're learning a good formula. Now, when steps 10, 11, and 12 come, say, now this is your new way of life. This is how you're going to do it. You're going to look at yourself, and when things are going wrong, you're going to figure out what's wrong with you, not what's wrong with everyone else. You're not going to be blaming. Then you're going to sit and reflect on that and see what you can do about it. And then you're going to go do something about it. In step 12, you're going to integrate all these things you've learned into your daily living.
Identifying the principles of how to stay in alignment so that you can stay in the flow of life as it manifests.
This is the new possibility for us.
Right.
This is that new way of life. Because before we'd say, what's wrong with them? Let me figure out what they need to do to change. And I'm going to tell them about it. I mean, that's how steps 10 and 11 and 12 were worked before for us. I'll decide what you just did wrong. I'll think about it a lot, probably resent you for it. And then I'm going to tell you what you need to do to change.
Yes.
That's
How you can make me happy.
How you can make me happy. And this flips the whole stage. This is the turnaround. These 3 steps are the turnaround steps.
That's for me, that's a loaded word. I first adopted that word from Byron Katie, who talks about the turnaround, because I'd had the experience in the resentment inventory where I was a victim until I saw the truth that I was actually the perpetrator. Yeah. And no, I was victimized. That's clear. We make that clear in our earlier comments. But now today, I'm a perpetrator. I am the person responsible for the way my feet move and the outcome and consequences of the way my feet impact my world. It's like, if you want to know the truth, don't look at your head. If you want to know the truth, don't look at your heart. Until you've developed into a wisdom person, of course. But if you really want to know the truth, and inventory tells you the truth, it's all about your feet. It's all about your behavior. My behavior told me what my beliefs are. My behavior told me what my motives were. My behavior told me what principles I was using or wasn't using. My behavior told me who I was. If you're robbing banks, you're a bank robber. It is so, I hate it because it's so confrontive. And when I say it, I know people hate me, but that's just like, I'm delivering the truth. It'll set you free, but first it will piss you off.
Maslow forgot to include that. The truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. But then you got to find the courage to live it, right?
That's right.
We'll add that from now on in this whole thing. So this is what Virginia says, is that we must not allow other people's limited perceptions to define us. You see, this is back to getting grounded in ourselves, right? And to understand that if I'm getting upset and I'm letting what somebody else is saying about me define me, then I have now deflected. I've abdicated my responsibility to hold on to myself. It's not about changing their mind. It's about getting centered again. I'm sorry, I keep looking over here. I know you guys are over here, but you guys are all over here on the right side of my screen. So that's why my head goes over there. So no, when I'm over here, I'm looking at you. I'm just looking at you over there, not over here. So this is an important thing, is not to let other people's limited perceptions define us. Listen to what Dr. Eric Fromm says. He says, the aim of life is to live it intensely, to be fully born, to be fully awake. There's that term again, to be fully awake, to emerge from the ideas of infantile grandiosity into the conviction of one's real strength. That's what emotional sobriety is. It's finding one's real strength. And he defines that. He gets a little more specific. He says, to be able to accept the paradox that every one of us is the most important thing in the universe to us, and at the same time, not more important than a fly or a blade of grass. See, it's that humility, is holding the balance between being important and not being important. It's holding that paradox.
Well, the way I phrase it, Alan, is that I am the center of my life.
Yes.
I am just not the center of life.
That's right. There you go. That's the balance. You hear the balance in it, right?
That's the humility. All
I'm
right.
powerless and I'm powerful. See, it's that paradox. It's
I-
holding the paradox.
I am powerless and I am responsible.
That's right. That's right. See, so these things become an important part of this emotional fire sobriety to discover our own strength. So we'll do this one and then we'll take a little break. This is the first 3 concepts. We'll do concept number 9 and then we'll take a little break. We strive to live right here, right now, and flow with what is next. So all this is about being present to now, to being present to this moment, because it's in this moment where new possibilities exist for us. Not in what's happened in the past. That's already happened. It's not what's going to happen in the future. It's bringing my awareness to right now. Now, the way I've talked about this lately is to think about consciousness as both, it can be horizontal and vertical. So when my consciousness is horizontal, it moves from this moment to what I'm going to say next. And that's when I'm flowing. Remember, we talked about in the letter, the real current can't flow unless these paralyzing dependencies are broken and broken at depth, right? So when I am flowing, I am moving from now into next. I move towards what I want to say next. I move towards taking care of what my need is, to mobilize myself in now. Now, the problem is when my past becomes my present. So instead of now flowing along my horizontal consciousness, I go vertical. And instead of being with Herb right now, he's now my father who was rejecting to me. And I'm no longer relating to Herb as Herb is. I'm relating to Herb now with the distortion that he's my dad. And I'm not dealing with him. I'm dealing with these unresolved issues from my past.
But none of that's conscious.
None of that is conscious. That going vertical happens so quickly. It happens so quickly. I was sharing an example of the other day about a transaction that happened with my wife and I, using it to illustrate me being able to stand for myself without being selfish. And this person I was talking to, she took it as though I was humiliating and criticizing my wife. And as we got into it, what revealed happened is that her husband used to humiliate her and criticize her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't differentiate. And see, this is the importance of emotional sobriety, is to be able to differentiate now from my past. Because when I don't differentiate it, then I'm going to take my past and I'm going to relate to now as though it's my past. And I'm not going to be able to deal well with what's going on, because now is not my past. It's now. It is right here, right now. Now, maybe I need to bring my past into the now and talk to my father if that's the issue that I need to deal with. That's the way to get free from that stuff. But when I'm not paying attention to, am I seeing you? Am I really here with you, or am I dealing with something from my past? Then I'm not going to be effective, because those feelings from my past are going to show up, and now they're going to create a whole different kind of experience for me. And this is why we talk about it is so important to take care of your unfinished business. If you've got resentment, if you've got pain, if you've got trauma, they need to be worked through. You cannot use a spiritual bypass to deal with these things. You've got to go back and find the words that you didn't have back then and say them. You got to cry the tears that you never cried, or you've got to scream the scream that you never had, or you've got to allow yourself to have the rage that was never allowed, or you were never allowed to have. That work becomes so important. I've done it. I know Herb's done it. As I said to you before, my sponsor's done it. When my father died, I never said goodbye to him. That incompletion, that grief that was never processed and dealt with, and the trauma around that just sat inside me. And when I drank, I got freedom from it, but only when I drank or used other drugs. To get real freedom, I had to work through it. I had to talk to my dad. I had to say goodbye to him. I had to cry. I had to be angry with him that he was leaving me. I mean, all these emotions that I didn't want to deal with. I didn't know how to deal with, the truth be known. There wasn't an atmosphere in my family that made that okay. I had to now create that in my life. And when I did, I started to get some freedom from those things.
And there are many resources to be able to access that. And I had to use a whole myriad of them. Certainly the step 4 resentment inventory, the column 3 and column 4 more than once, and the prayer that goes with that, but also the deep therapy that I did one-on-one, the group therapy I did in terms of human healing and rite of passage work.
Didn't you go to LifeSpring? You went to LifeSpring too, didn't you?
I did LifeSpring. I did a men's healing group, the Bataka work. And I mean, I can't tell you the kind of writhing emotion that came out of that. But as a result of purging from a variety of angles, I got free. I got detoxed, if you will.
That's you did. You thawed out.
Yes.
See, that's the word you use. You thawed out. Yeah. And it wasn't a one and done thing.
No,
it's not one and done. No. It's like it's one, and that starts to open the door. I mean, with the grief with my dad, that when I opened that up, and when I was 19, he died when I was 11, 8 years later. I hadn't cried. I hadn't talked about it, nothing. When I opened that up, now that became accessible. And I would cry about it, and I go to deeper and deeper levels of acceptance and resolution. And that's the part of this, is that as I allow myself to experience those things that weren't experienced, they become resolved and integrated at deeper and deeper levels. And that's where our freedom comes from, some of this stuff that we're talking about that goes on. So this is what Fritz says. He goes, this is why I'm absolutely dogmatic in regard to the fact that nothing exists except in the now. And in the now, you are behaving a certain way that will or will not facilitate your development. In the now, right now, recovery is about right now. Emotional sobriety is about right now. He says your acquisition of a better ability to cope with life, to make available what was unavailable before. Those tears that I never cried. They became available to me so I could become more fully human again. I was not a human being. I was a fragmented being, right? Now, what was unavailable became available. I began to fill the void in my existence, and not to fill it with booze and other drugs, but to fill it with experience, with love, with compassion, with healing. He says, learning is discovering and uncovering what is there. That's the exciting journey of recovery. And I say it's exciting. That doesn't mean it's not fraught with pain. It's not fraught with, like Herb said, he's sitting there. He's got snot coming down his face, man. I got to tell you, he had snot. He had tears coming out of his eyes, snot in his face. It wasn't pretty, but it was freeing. It's incredible stuff. This is so exciting.
Well, because let's not lose sight of the huge vision that you painted earlier with one word.
Yeah.
Freedom. This is about freedom from our addiction, and that's the least of the payoffs.
Yeah.
This is about freedom from our self-centeredness. This is about freedom from our unmanageability. This is about freedom from our spiritual malady. This is about freedom from our daily suffering. I really mean freedom.
Freedom.
All right. To live a life that flourishes.
And look, and that freedom is obtained, by learning how to, instead of ready, fire, aim, ready, aim, fire, right?
Right. That's about consciousness.
That's the consciousness. And we get to that ready, aim, fire by living in the space between what happens and our reaction to it. This is how Viktor Frankl said. He says there's a space between the stimulus and our response, I would say, in our reaction. He says in that space is our power to choose our response. says, in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Try to live in that space so you can learn to act on the situation and not react to it.
We're not free if we don't know we're free.
That's right. That's right. So here's step 12, Herb.
Well, this is about the freedom. That's the promise at the end of the journey. Quite frankly, about 3 years ago, I started doing my workshops with an explanation of step 12, doing it almost in reverse, because people needed to know what the goal was, what was the vision, what was the whole purpose of doing these 12 steps over a weekly workshop for a year. My God, what a commitment. Well, let's get the neon sign up there. It's about a spiritual awakening. That's the guarantee. That's the promise. Having had a spiritual awakening, what does it mean? Simply put, a change, a radical change in the way I think and feel and behave. And as I've said, done to us, not by us. That's that grace concept. I don't know how it happens. I just observe that it does, but it doesn't happen without my effort. And I added that line about 5 years ago, but not without us. It's done to me, but not by me, but not without me. And it's that willingness and grace dance that I can't explain. I observe. There's the mystery, that touch point. Some of you have seen a PowerPoint that I have, a picture of the Sistine Chapel with Michelangelo's God reaching down in creation and human person reaching up. And there's a space in between the fingers. They don't touch. Yeah. That space is the mystery of creation. That space is the mystery of the alchemy of the radical change that takes place with my willingness to take action and somehow the spirit of the flow and the mystery and the life force.
Well, you know, one of the things we can now relate this to back to Dr. Karen Horney's comment about with the weakening of the obstructive forces, the constructive forces of the real self have to grow. And see, that's what happens here, is that as we do this work, the way that I think it's said sometimes in the rooms is that we get out of our own way.
Yeah.
Right? We get out of our way. And when we get out of our way, this movement towards what we can be starts to take over. And it's just like that child. As soon as a child is born, you don't have to tell the child to breathe. The child wants to breathe. The child is doing it, but that's wired in the child to do. It's not the child is willing that. The child is just moving to that, right? It's what's next for the child. That's what happens is we start to now flow with our life. We start, as we become more and more whole or holy, or however you want to think about it, is now things start to happen that seem to be instinctive. We have a new response to things that come from some place within us that's not even conscious at times.
Right.
It's a remarkable process, this process of transformation and change that takes place here. You know, we become what we can be. And we never can fully understand what that's going to mean until we're on this journey and we start to discover it.
I talk about this process is a process and it takes a while, like the dimmer switch, to get enough energy into the system that the lights begin to really be bright enough to see. And it will happen inevitably. It's a promise someday, but not by Sunday.
Yeah, there you go. I love that. Someday, but not by Sunday. So let's take our break here.
Hello, Alan, you're back, and so am I.
Okay, great. It's really flowing nice today.
Well, you and I always have a good time. I hope they enjoy it too.
Me too. I think if we're having a good time, they're having a good time.
Yeah, probably. Let's count on it.
But it's so fun that we discover new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
you made a few comments today that were different, and
yeah.
I just love that, the
Yeah.
discovery process here.
Well, that's what happens when you're awake and you're fostering that awakeness, that consciousness. That it's life is just so full. Yeah.
I know.
You're ready to continue?
Yeah, we're ready to go. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break. I've got my, I don't know how to say it, Fage yogurt and a nice glass of water. So I'm all getting nourished. Susie, what are you eating over in Chicago, huh? We can't hear you. I don't think they're going to let you. They're not going to let you unmute, Susie. So we'll just, can you do a thing where you, a waffle. Wonderful.
Protein. Yeah, right.
Protein.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me share my screen again with you. And then so we can now pick up core concept number 10. These are all important concepts, and you can see that they're building upon one another, just like the steps do. When you work the steps, they are sequential and they generate a certain kind of energy. Well, that's what happens as we work, some of these core concepts in emotional sobriety, that they start they have this cumulative effect, right? And just understand that Bill said it, is more will be revealed to us. And it's so true, is that stuff that it may be, baffling you this year in your life, if you continue to do the work and keep showing up, that next year, you're going to all of a sudden discover some solutions to those dilemmas that you couldn't find, right now. And it doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that you have not developed that capability yet, and it's coming. I mean, that's the great news about this work, is that recovery is possible. We can continue to grow along these lines. That's, to me, what's so exciting about it. And this next area is a very important area to grow along, and it's learning how to have healthy relationships. In fact, Ernie Larson says stage 2 recovery, which I think is in some ways akin to emotional sobriety, is about learning how to have healthy relationships. And what makes the relationship healthy is our ability to cooperate without losing our integrity. It's what I said earlier about being able to act for yourself without being selfish, and be able to act for someone else without being selfless, is to find that balance. You see that there are two very powerful instinctual forces within us, and that is the desire to connect, to cooperate, to join, to be a part of, to please. And also the equal force that is also important is to be your own person, is to honor yourself, to march to your own drum, to not get lost, but to pay attention to what's important to you, to keep your autonomy. Your individuality is another way to say it. And how do we put those together? Well, some families emphasize togetherness and some families emphasize individuality. We call them centrifugal or centripetal families. Centrifugal families are throwing their kids out, get out of the house, get away, go live your life. Go. It's all about being individuals. Other families, hold on. You can't go anywhere. You've got to do what I want you to do. They emphasize the togetherness side of it. Well, both of those are important, but if one family emphasizes one at the expense of the other, we're going to grow up, if that was our family that emphasized togetherness, we're not going to know how to deal with individuality. And if our family emphasized our independence, so to speak, which is a kind of a compromised form of individuality, and that's for another time of discussion. But if our family emphasized that independence, we're not going to know how to join. We're not going to know how to be a part of. So when Bill talks about emotional sobriety as real maturity and balance, it's learning how to balance these forces in our life. And if we can balance that desire to be connected with our desire to be ourself and to honor ourselves, then we've really discovered a very important key to having healthy relationships. In fact, Erich Fromm calls it union with the preservation of integrity. Union with the preservation of integrity. This was in his book, The Art of Loving, because he says that this is what mature love is about, as opposed to immature love, with his union with no integrity. You lose yourself completely in the situation, and that's immature love. Now, how do we achieve that? How do we get to that point? Well, Dr. Jerry Greenwald, I think, really gave us a lot of great suggestions about how to do that. He says, it's not possible for me to relate to others intimately and allow, and I love this, and enjoy their full expression of themselves if I've not discovered how to do this for myself. You see, this is an elaboration of that whole idea. I can't love someone else unless I love myself. But if you take it down a few levels, this is really at the core of it. If I haven't developed a relationship with myself where I can accept myself, that doesn't mean that I don't want to continue to improve and to address those areas where I'm undeveloped and where I'm immature, et cetera, et cetera. But it means if I can accept and I can relate to myself, right, enjoy myself and the full expression of myself, then I can encourage you to be yourself. If I can encourage me to be myself, I can encourage you to be yourself. And that's the foundation of a healthy relationship. It's based on, I want you to be who you are. And that's what mature love is. It's not that I want you to do what I want you to do. I want you to do what you want to do. And, hopefully that you're able to do that too. And if I have that attitude, I want you to do what you want to do. I want you to be who you are, not who I think I need you to be. Now we are forming the foundation of a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship has room enough for two people.
My experience with that, Alan, is it's not a linear relationship.
No.
Independence and interdependence. It's a spiral dynamic. Yeah. And I wouldn't want to emphasize I need self-love before I can love others, or I need to love others before I can have self-love, because quite frankly, I don't believe, neither one of those are my experience on the emphasis. What is my experience is that it began gradually as I began to go to meetings early and stay late to be helping out. I had a sense of, because I was contributing and fitting in, I had a sense of self-esteem. And that was the play that was at work. And then I was able to do a fourth step in which I took responsibility. And then as I reached out to become a better person behaviorally in my marriage, I began to think better of myself. So there was like the spiral dynamic that's almost like a feeding mechanism. The more I do one, the stronger the other becomes.
And that's right on. It does the same way that our illness can spiral down, recovery spirals up. Right?
There it is.
It's that same thing, right? We're just kind of now putting the energy in the other direction, and it's based on a whole different set of principles. Now, the important thing about this is that the relationships are determined bilaterally, meaning this was the observation of many of the family therapists, is that there's this reciprocal influence. They call it the emotional unit, right? is what I'm doing impacts my partner, what my partner's doing impacts me.
Yeah.
That's very natural. That happens in every relationship. We've got to strive to not be overly influenced. We're always going to be influenced by our partner, because that's, if somebody can't hurt you, there's no love in it, right? I mean, if somebody's not important to you, it's not going to matter what they do. We're not talking about that. We're talking about letting them matter without losing yourself.
Yeah.
Back to acting for others without being selfless, keeping yourself in it, union with the preservation of integrity. See, that's a whole different way of relating than what we've experienced in the past.
Well, one of the phrases that you use that I really have quoted so many times, and that is, we need to learn how to hold on to ourselves.
It's so true. It's holding on to yourself, is that ability to stay connected and not get lost in the connection. Now, I just want to say this about what Dr. Brandon says here, and then we'll step back and look at this in a big context. He says, Dr. Nathaniel Brandon was one of the foremost authorities on self-esteem. He's written some wonderful books. He goes, this is one of the reasons why attempts at relationships so often fail. Not because the vision of a passionate or romantic love is intrinsically irrational and unattainable, but because the self-esteem needed to support it is absent. See, it's what Herb was saying, is as he was doing this work on himself, as he was now growing along these lines, new possibilities started to present themselves to him in his relationships. He could relate to his wife, Mary, in a very different way. Instead of seeing her as someone there to meet his needs, he could see Mary and what her needs were. And now start to have a relationship where there was room for two. I mean, I saw that grow between you two.
Yeah.
Before it was a very, very one-sided deal for you. And through your recovery, that relationship became so balanced as those forces in you became balanced.
Right.
The desire to take care of yourself, but at the same time, the desire to please Mary.
Yeah.
You started to hold that at the same level.
The paradox was, the better I got, the better she got.
Well, it sure seemed like that, didn't it? It's so true. It's so true, right? It's so true. Is that we start to see this person, because now you can see things in her that you couldn't see before, just like you were seeing things in yourself you couldn't see.
Yeah.
The same thing is true for me. I couldn't see things in other people before, when I had very limited perception of them. Once again, if it was based on my need for their validation, I could only see whether they were approving or disapproving of me.
Right.
And I couldn't see them as individuals in their own right.
Right.
It's an amazing the shift in that dynamic, isn't it, Herb? How powerful it is.
And it was helpful. I mean, there's so many tributaries to the flow of that river that build it, and part of it is, of course, self-knowledge. Part of it is knowledge of other people. One of the major impacts was a study I did on personality theory through the Enneagram, which allowed me to really appreciate that people are not better or worse than, they're just different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's legitimate, it's biological. It's at the root physiological difference. It's nobody's fault or credit. It's just different. That may or may not ring anybody's bell, but I'll tell you what, it was transformative to me in my relationships with people.
No, it's remarkable at one point when we realized that there are these differences and that it's not just one way, right?
Correct.
It's that if they're not the way that I think they should be, they're wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, see, that isn't and it sounds so base, but it's such an epiphany at times when you're in the middle of it. And a lot of us think we're respecting differences when we're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'll sit with a couple and they say, well, I think we respect each other. And then 5 minutes later, they show me how they don't. because it takes a lot of work to get past some of these ideas that we have that are unconscious oftentimes about how things are supposed to be. Now, as we do this work and as we start to have room for the other person, what happens with emotional sobriety is we stop taking things personally. And I love the way that Dr. Kempler said this. He goes that in order to be more personal in a relationship with someone you care about, you need to stop taking your partner's behavior personally. Because it's only when you stop seeing what they're doing as a reflection of how they feel about you that you can start to learn who they are and see their behavior as a reflection of who they are, rather than as a reflection of how they feel about you.
That's a spiritual awakening. That differentiation, that is extremely important consciousness.
It's an amazing thing. And when you start to integrate this idea in your relationships, I can't tell you how much freedom starts to happen.
Yeah.
And how your reactivity decreases.
Yeah, right. Well, you have nothing to defend when you're
There's nothing.
observing that what they're saying is naming them. It's not you.
Wow, that's a great way to say it. It names them, not you. And now, because you're not taking it personally, you can actually have empathy for their position. You
Yeah.
can have compassion for them. You know, you, like Herb says, you're in an undefended position. There's nothing to defend. It's not about whether you're good or bad. It's about what's going on for them. And then you realize that they're expressing themselves in the best way they know how. That oftentimes underneath what they're saying, even if they're calling me a name, you know, if
Right.
my partner is saying you're a fucking idiot, well, you know, I know I'm an idiot, so I don't need to defend that anymore. I'm way past that part. But even if I didn't know I was an idiot, I don't have to defend it, because they're not calling me names. They're just saying they're in pain, and this is the way they've learned to express their pain, by calling names. So they probably grew up in a family where people were yelling at each other like that when they were in pain, because no one knew how to talk about their pain.
But that's a great pause. That's a great pause when somebody has that level of energy, is to hold your breath for just a minute and ask, where is that coming from?
Yes.
What does that mean as a statement of who they are and what they're feeling right now?
It's so powerful, because if you can do that, there's your freedom.
Correct.
Right there is your freedom, your experience of emotional freedom. That you're no longer needing to control them, to get them to talk to you in the way that you think you need them to talk to you, in terms of respecting you. Because I hear this all the time. My God, you know, if my partners call me a fucking idiot, it means they don't respect me. That has nothing to do with you, first of all. And if you want to talk about respect is respecting the fact that they're expressing themselves in the best way possible, and that they don't need to follow any kind of rules you have about what they're supposed to do so you feel okay. Mm-hmm. If your sense of respect is dependent on them, then that's the problem, not what they're doing. I can't say that any more clearly. If your sense of being respected is dependent on how your partner's behaving, you're never going to feel respected. My sense of respect depends on what I'm doing, not what anybody else is doing, mm-hmm. how I'm dealing with it. And if I don't take it personally, I sure respect myself a hell of a lot more, instead of getting in there and when there's a problem, throwing some gasoline on it. Right. If they're in pain and now I start to get mad at them for how they're talking to me, I'm sure not helping matters out. Right. I'm just making them worse. Because now I'm throwing in all these rules about what they should be doing and how they should act to be a good partner. Well, that's not my idea of a good partner. A good partner is somebody who encourages someone to allow and to encourage them to express themselves in whatever way they can at that moment. Because if they keep yelling enough, they're going to get down to crying. If they keep screaming enough, that eventually they'll get to what's underneath that, because the anger is not the issue. The issue is there's some pain in there that they don't know how to talk about, or they don't feel safe in talking about. And if I lay rules on top of them about how they should talk, I'm not creating an atmosphere that encourages them to get to what's really going on. I'm making rules more important than people. And that's one way that we can destroy a relationship, is when we have more room for rules than for the person, than for us being humans. Humans are a messy thing. We're not.
Well, and part of the issue is I see that a lot of people have rules for themselves that they don't even know they have rules for.
Right.
And there's the real conundrum, you know. That's one of the attractions to me of the 12-step spirituality, and others like it, where there are no rules. Bill said there's only two disciplines, or there's only two rules in Alcoholics Anonymous. One is God and one is alcohol. You're either going for one or you're going for the other.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no rules.
Right.
There's total freedom.
Yeah. And please don't hear this to say that if you're feeling scared and you're not safe,
Right.
to not take care of yourself.
Right,
We're not
absolutely.
advocating. You got to act for others without being selfless. So if my partner's screaming at me, and from my past, I start worrying about being hit and afraid, right? My physical safety seems threatened. I would say to my partner, look, please keep screaming and yelling. I'm going to go for a walk. And, hopefully when I come back, you've screamed enough where we can just talk in a different way about this. But I don't try to control them. I encourage them to do what they need, and I take care of myself. I act for myself instead of sitting there and trembling. I don't need to do that. I can go ahead and encourage them to take care of themselves and take care of myself at the same time. So we are not advocating that you put yourself in a situation you don't feel safe, but you got to take responsibility for feeling safe. Right. You got to act on your behalf.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not their parent. You're not their therapist at all. Yeah.
And if you need some help, you can say, look, I'm scared right now. I'm sorry, I can't do this. If it's possible for you to help protect me or help me feel safe, I'd love it. If not, then I'll do what I need to do it. See, we can ask for that help, but most people, it's the darndest thing is as soon as we get scared, we don't ask for help. We attack. You're scaring me. You shouldn't be doing that, stuff like that. Instead of saying, I'm scared, can you protect me? Wow. It's a whole different way of being present in our relationships. I love this. Listen to what Byron Katie says. It takes one clear person to have a good relationship. Right? If I start letting go of my rules and I start to make room enough for two, the relationship starts to change. It can't continue on the way it continued. Bill said it when he was talking about emotional sobriety and the steps. He says, if we practice these principles in our daily lives, that we and those about us begin to achieve emotional sobriety. This stuff is infectious. It does change the way things are because the whole dance changes. We don't do the same dance. If I stop trying to control you, then that whole dance and struggle around me controlling you is over. Now we have to find a new way to relate. And hopefully, and as we're talking about, that new way can be a lot better than it was.
Along that line, and in light of Byron Katie being mentioned, her book, Loving What is about accepting reality as it is and asking questions. She's got 3 or 4 questions that bring you right to the edge of seeing reality as it is. She doesn't come from psychology or spirituality or from 12-step, as I understand it. She comes from her own personal experience and her own vocabulary. That's why it's so refreshing to read Loving What Is.
Yeah, the inquiry is very interesting because it is a pathway to emotional sobriety. I think the questions go something like this. That's the first one is, well, what do you believe to be true, right? So, if I believe my partner needs to talk to me this way for us to have a better relationship. So that's your belief. She goes, what if for a minute you entertain, well, what does it mean for you that that's true? What are the implications of that? Well, they have to talk a certain way. I have rules for them. So you list all the things that if that's true, what has to happen for that truth to be realized, right? To be manifest. Then she goes, what if it's not? What if that's not true? That you've made up that narrative about how life is supposed to be. And she goes, what if you now say, if I let go of that, what are the implications of that? Well, God, I stopped trying to control my partner. I stopped thinking that they don't care about me. Then she goes into all the things if it's not true. And then she says, now turn it around. Instead of saying they have to behave a certain way for me to feel okay about myself, the turnaround is I have to behave a certain way to feel okay about myself. Instead of saying they have to make me feel safe, I need to make myself feel safe. Instead of they need to be more respectful of me, I need to be more respectful of me. That's the turnaround. And you can see when she does that, it empowers the person now to change their experience. And that turnaround is at the heart of emotional sobriety.
I'm so glad that you articulated it with some flesh on the skeleton like that, Alan. I was conducting a workshop on the fourth step and the third and fourth column, which I call the conversion or spiritual awakening from the beliefs of the third column to the truth of the fourth column. And somebody came up to me and they said, oh, you've read Byron Katie. I said, I have no idea who she is. I've never read her book. And they gave me the book right there because, in fact, the process is identical. The process of the third and the fourth column, the turnaround. And I'm assuming you could bring your vocabulary from psychology in the same way. The turnaround is, in fact, the heart of the matter of enlightenment.
That's right. Because see, in Gestalt therapy, we call it assimilating our projection. So if I'm projecting onto you, you're being unfair, it means I'm being unfair. I'm just not seeing it. So the turnaround is to realize where I'm being unfair, not that you're being unfair. Because when I project something, I set the boundaries way too much in my favor. I think you have all these bad traits. And of course, I'm the saint here.
Right.
Oh, there are no saints and there are no devils. It's just two people trying to figure things out. But her work is very, very good. And you can hear Herb and I both respect her a lot and encourage you.
Yeah.
This is some good ancillary reading in terms of if you want to learn more about emotional sobriety, this is something that I would definitely encourage you to look into.
Yeah.
So we're at core concept number 11. We strive to expand our consciousness. Boy, that's what all this is about, is we're moving towards expanding our consciousness. So I'll turn this over to you, Herb.
Well, as I mentioned, and most of you know a little bit about my story, I studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years in a seminary that was very much like a monastery. I lived in a room by myself. It was 7 years of silence, although we had classes, and of course you talk in the classes, but the overall environment was one of study and spirituality and prayer and meditation. And when I left in 1964, I hung up my black robe and I didn't meditate again for another 25 years. As I had done this work then, with 5 years of sobriety, I looked back on that period and tried to figure out in inventory, what was going on and what were the motive was that I was a monk because I wore a black robe, and monks meditate. When I took the black robe off in 1964, I didn't meditate because I'm not a monk anymore. Well, because I didn't know what meditation was. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know the benefit of it, even after 7 years, because I had never applied it personally. It had all, like the black robe, but been put on externally to me. I'm a monk now. I wear a black robe and I meditate. I take the black robe off. I'm not a monk anymore. Bill gives us step 11 in the big book, pages 85 to 88. And I'm not going to do a teaching right now on it in any depth, but the key to it was given to me by this man who took me through the steps, a key that's not in the big book. in the simple way that this man applied it. He said, look up the word meditation in the dictionary, which I did, directed thinking. The big book says we ask God to direct our thinking. This man said, that's a prayer. God, please direct my thinking. The big book says we think about the 24 hours a day, we consider our plans. All of that's in the book. All of that's in the definitions of meditation, directed thinking. What isn't there was the key that unlocked the door to meditation. I hope you really can hear this. We ask God to direct our thinking, then we begin thinking. This man then said, and we listen to our thinking as the possible answer to the prayer. That the thoughts that we have, the feelings that we have, the awareness that we have, the sensations that we have are possibly the medium of the message as an answer to the prayer. I've never heard God speak audibly, but now with this new key that opened the door of meditation, I hear that tiny whispering sound. By the way, that's the accurate translation. We small voice is a wonderful phrase. It's just not accurate. We small voice is not an accurate translation. The translation is tiny whispering sound. It's subtle until you really appreciate that there's no voice. There's no words. There's a vibration of some kind. There's a sense of some kind. The thoughts and the feelings and the sensations and the intuition. The word inspiration comes from the Greek word spiros, S-P-I-R-O-S, which is breath. The breath of God, inspiration. We listen with our entire being, with our entire consciousness, and this improves our consciousness. Now, the jury's in, the evidence is conclusive. If you meditate, your biology will be better. If you meditate, your psychology will be better. If you meditate, your sociology will be better. Your health, your emotions, your relationships, absolutely. But that's not step 11 in the big book. Step 11 is about theology. Listen to it. Sought through prayer and meditation. Those are the tools. Seeking is the mechanism. Seeking, active, not passive, active. In the case of meditation, active thinking, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with this life force as we don't understand it. To improve our conscious contact. That's the only goal of step 11 in the big book. You can pick out your own personal goal in terms of to improve my consciousness with the flow of life so that I can live it more effectively, more realistically, more in alignment with the flow. I've not had a problem with meditation since 1988, since that man gave me the key to listen. The big book was written by Bill Wilson, who was in the Oxford group. The Oxford group trained him to meditation for one reason, to get guidance. That's the purpose of step 11, guidance for our day and guidance for our life. And we listen to the tiny whispering sound. That's my short lecture. Thank you. Did that help, Alan?
Oh, God, yes. I just love how you describe that. You know,
It's so simple.
Yeah.
Meditation.
But, look, we don't oftentimes see. I think that's the other part of this is that I remember when we went to that weekend, and that we would have these experiences that Richard Rohr would conduct, and then we would be told to go find a place, draw a 10-foot circle, and sit for 3 hours by yourself.
Right.
My goodness, I had never spent that much time with myself in a long time.
Yeah.
And now I'm sitting with my thoughts and stuff. And I think that's something we just don't typically do in our society.
Yeah.
We're moving so quickly, we don't stop. And part of it too is I don't want to know what's coming up. I don't want to feel some of the feelings that might come up inside of me, right? because I have rules about what I'm supposed to be like and what life is supposed to be like. So when we start clearing away in this stuff, and it's really clearing away, like Herb was saying, is that as we do that, now we start to be available to whatever is surfacing for us. You know, there's been some amazing things that have come to you in meditation.
Yeah.
When you brought some questions in for yourself.
Yeah. Well, and part of the misunderstanding that's pandemic in the world, let alone in the 12-step culture, is that meditation is no thinking, is emptiness, is silence. That's a whole different.
Well, yeah, because what are you told? Empty your mind, right?
Exactly.
That's typically the instruction.
Yeah, and you can't.
No.
Because the mind's function is to think. And so I'm going to stop because I don't want to get too distracted from the focus of meditation is to think and to listen to our thinking as the possible direction and answer to the prayer, or at least the open mind and open heart, whether you believe in prayer or not. Thanks, Alan.
That's great. This is what Bill says. He says there's a direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices can bring much relief and have much benefit. But when they are logically interwoven, hear that, when they are woven together, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. Because this is contributing towards living in what Dr. Frankl called the space between the stimulus and our response. Right? This is one way to get into that space. It creates an unshakable foundation. An unshakable foundation is another phrase to describe emotional sobriety. This is Frankl again, and he says it. The way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering it entails, the way he takes up his cross, gives him ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add deeper meaning to his life. And I believe that would be a result, wouldn't you say, Herb, of meditation, is you start to get a deeper meaning to your life. You start to become familiar with like the wisdom side of ourselves, right? The side of us that is holy, that God within, as some people describe it.
That's the total function of the mind, is to expand in consciousness. I've actually, as part of the reflection on that, come to some intuition that this, whatever we call God, that reality is consciousness. Itself with a capital C, and what we're doing is participating in it to the level that we improve that consciousness.
So here we are at number 12. It's about self-transcendence. We give ourselves freely and willfully to serve a greater purpose in our life. You know, that's what emotional sobriety is all about. And it's a powerful part of self-actualization, as Dr. Frankl said. He says, true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his own psyche. He goes, I have termed this constitutive characteristic the self-transcendence of human existence. That's how he talks about getting out of ourselves, right? It's the self-transcendence of human existence. He says it points to the fact that being human almost always, or being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself. The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. We have a deep desire to be of value to other people. And one way of thinking about our suffering and our addiction is that we haven't known how to really be of value. We get too wrapped up into making it about us. And so it's hard to make it about a purpose greater than ourselves when our purpose is just ourselves. And see, that's what happens with the sickness in our culture. It's all about us. It's a culture that encourages narcissism,
Right.
not to the point of a personality disorder, but it's all about us all the time. And getting out of ourselves in this way with a low focus on ourselves is at the heart of emotional sobriety.
That's why I think the 12 steps are built so wonderfully with the step 11 is to improve my consciousness, but the step 12 is to allow myself to contribute to other people in some fashion, to help other people. I dropped the word service a long time ago. And I substitute the word, which is really prevalent in the big book, to help, because it brings so much more practical application to it. To how can I help?
And I think, look, Herb, the thing I'm so excited about us is how in so many ways we do this with sharing about emotional sobriety and helping carry the message about this, because this is, to me, such a powerful, powerful part of our program.
Well, as you know, I did a study, a pretty extensive study over at least a year on happiness. I was being asked to do a workshop and presentation by some people on happiness, and I knew nothing about the formal ingredients of it. So I studied what was going on in the current research about 3 years ago. And quite frankly, there's quite a bit. I got at least 10 major books from either universities and or major spiritual leaders or traditions on and various ways of using vocabulary to talk about happiness. Every one of them could be distilled down to what one of the teachers said. Anybody who wants to be happy, that's their goal, they will never be happy, because happiness is not a product. It's a byproduct. It's a byproduct of my sense of a meaning and context bigger than myself, and an ability to contribute to the people around me. And I thought, how perfect for step 11 and 12.
Yeah.
A meaning bigger than myself, and how perfect for step 12, a contribution to other people. And in my dilettante study of Buddhism, they have two principles: wisdom and compassion. Those are identical synonyms for what we're talking about. And of course, anybody familiar with the Judeo or the Christian philosophies and theologies know that those are the two primary principles. Love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. The Judeo parallels in the Christian are the same: love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as God loves you. Just a little bit of a different twist on it, but they're all saying the same thing. So we're not talking about religion, and we're not talking about traditions other than the way they've synthesized it. What we're talking about is human nature. And when you take a look at the way humans are built, we have two things that make us specifically human. Number one is our mind, that we can know that we know. And the other is that we have a free will to make decisions and to take actions. All of the even steps are knowing steps. All of the odd steps are decision and action steps. It's really a very intriguing dynamic. The steps are built specifically for human development based on what makes us most human.
Well, fantastic. So talk about integration and disintegration.
Well, that's the dimmer switch. This whole awakening, this thawing out, this process of enlightenment, this process of maturity, this process of emotional sobriety, the dimmer switch. We get sober and it goes up a little bit with working the steps and finish the 9th step, and we get into the 10th step, and that's emotional sobriety. An awakening happens. And then we continue practicing steps 10, 11, and 12, and we have what I call spiritual sobriety, two sides of the same coin, a relationship with other and a relationship with other. But that dimmer switch goes down a notch at a time, like Thibault said. The ego regenerates itself with a little bit of held resentment, a little secret, some fears that are not talked about, some sexuality that is allowed to permeate your life. And the dimmer switch goes down a notch at a time. And the darkness descends and the obsession returns and we're back into relapse. The dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time, but it goes down a notch at a time. And one of my favorite images is that we stay gently pressed up against it. Gentle, there's no violence here. Stay gently pressed up against the dimmer switch with our steps 10 inventory, our step 11, improving our conscious contact, and our step 12, operating our life on principles, helping others to the best of our ability. Gentle, 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 but still proactive. This isn't a passive reception. This is a proactive sort of a dance. You used the term, Alan, a dance, that willingness and grace dance, a mystery and yet very effective. So that's the image that I am attempting to portray there. Step 12 talks about carrying the message, and Bill on page 89 in chapter 7, he says, nothing will so much ensure immunity. I mean, we're so familiar today with immunization and pandemic. Nothing will provide the inoculation against relapse. Nothing will provide inoculation against the spiritual malady, that selfishness and self-centeredness. Then he says, intensive work with others. Chapter 7 is that blueprint for how to help other people, especially with regard to their addiction, but perhaps in other areas. Immunization was the point of that. And practicing principles, I think we've had quite a bit of conversation. Bill gives us 4 chapters. Never once does he give us a list of principles, but he gives us models of it in our relationships, in our families, at work. And although chapter 11 is entitled A Vision for You, a very nice poetic title. When you read it, it's really about having relationships on principle in your work environment and in your fellowship. So the point is, identify the principle and always operate on principle. If there's something amiss in your life, it's because you're probably at cross purposes with some principle that is yours. You might not know it, or you might know it. But if you're disturbed, there's something wrong with your alignment with principles. Thanks, Alan.
So this is how Dr. Fromm describes mental health. I would also say that this could be considered a definition of emotional sobriety. He goes, to be able to love life. What does that mean? Well, to accept death without terror, to tolerate uncertainty about the most important questions with which life confronts us, and yet to have faith in our thought and feeling. Because in as much as they are truly ours, he says, to be alone and at the same time, one with a loved person, to follow the voice of our conscience, the voice that calls us to ourselves, yet not to indulge in self-hate when the voice of conscience was not loud enough to be heard and followed. Wow. To not indulge, we're going to feel some self-hate at times, but not to get lost in it, not to indulge in self-hate when that voice of our conscience was not loud enough for us to hear it. And then we get to work on understanding what made us not hear that voice of our conscience. And we start to understand that dynamic, and we grow ourselves through that. But to be able to love life, to be able to fully embrace life as life is. And then we're back to happiness, Herb.
Well, and this is sort of a synthesis of the recommendations from these various studies of psychologists and theologians and practical human development people and various spiritual leaders in various traditions. This is a synthesis of it. It's a daily practice. It makes it really simple when you talk about a gratitude list. You hear it all the time, of course, in the rooms, but they had a specific practice that you have a list, but you add only one thing to it each morning. What you're grateful for that day, what you're conscious of that day. There's only one guideline, that you never add the same word to the list that's already on the list. Well, you can probably intuit that after 60, 90 days, that's going to be very challenging to not be redundant, to pick a new word to describe something that you're grateful for. And that's the total point of expanding your consciousness about your gratitude, going in that positive direction as to, well, this morning I was able to urinate. I mean, let's get really down to it, you know? It's kind of like, well, because I didn't have anything else on my list, that was a good thing, you know? Prayer, of course, so much misunderstanding about prayer. Prayer does not change God, at least in my theology. Prayer changes me. The God of my not understanding cannot change. It cannot change. So why do I pray? I pray to have a new awareness of reality so that I can change. Meditation, I've talked about. It's a method of improving my consciousness. If you can think, you can meditate. And as you begin with 1 minute every day on a consistent basis, 1 minute of intentional consciousness, not prayer, not writing, not reading, intentional consciousness. Pay attention to what you're thinking and feeling and aware of your sensations. Pay attention in the milieu of prayer as the possibility of communication with the Spirit. 1 minute every day consecutively for 30 days. Once you have 30 days in a row, you will have established a practice. It might take you 120 days to get 30 days in a row, because if you miss a day, start counting again. These are simple sort of human guidance technologies. And then, of course, be helpful, or at least think about being helpful. Take a look at step 10 in the big book. He doesn't say actually help anybody. That fourth item in the step 10 tools, he said, resolutely turn your thoughts to helping somebody else. Don't actually necessarily help them. It may be inconvenient or irresponsible of you to take time out at this very moment to help somebody. But if you're thinking about helping somebody else, you're not thinking about yourself. The most important part of all of the moving parts on all of the 12-step or whatever practice you've embraced as your way of life, the most important part is accountability. Because if you have an accountability partner, you will do all the moving parts. It might be just the human sort of ego part of it, or whatever it is we need from a social support standpoint. I find sponsorship or step guide or mentorship or therapist, whatever the relationship is, as an accountability partner. It is, for me, the most important ingredient in the entire puzzle piece of human development.
Great, fantastic. Here's Fromm again. He goes, happiness is to experience fullness, not emptiness to be filled. It's just exactly what Herb was saying. It's the result of the relationship we have with ourselves, with life. And for us to be full, I think of it means that we are now bringing into harmony those parts of us that are in disharmony, so that we're no longer fragmented and we can now be fully alive, right? To be fully alive. And that means we're going to experience joy and happiness, we're also going to experience pain and sorrow. And what we know is that if you don't allow yourself to experience the pain and sorrow, it will, and there is no question about this, it will mute your experience of joy and happiness, because you're going to force yourself into one side of the equation of being human. And that is going to take away the other. The day is as bright because we have darkness, right? They both are important in terms of our experience. And the same with this is to be able to fully allow ourselves to experience whatever we're experiencing is the path to real happiness.
And many of the traditions talk about the middle way or the middle path. And Bill had talked about in the big book someplace, I think it's in A Vision for You, keep your head in the clouds and your feet on the ground.
Yep.
That's the balance there. You know, we're given lots of tools, we're given lots of challenges, but there's this balance that you want to talk about homeostasis for just a minute, because that's really connected, I think, to the heart of emotional sobriety.
Well, it is, because our homeostasis is this steady state that we achieve, and your body keeps a certain temperature, 98.6 degrees, right? Give or subtract a couple points depending on what's going on with you. But your body, physically, biologically, we're geared to keep that temperature. If you get too hot, you're going to do what? You're going to sweat to cool yourself off to get to 98.6. If you're cold, you'll start to shiver to move the cells around in your body so that you generate some heat. So we're constantly moving towards this. Well, psychologically, spiritually, it's the same thing. Is if we're now somehow, if I have a desire that moves me off this place, let's say, I feel lonely and I want to have some kind of a personal connection. If I then mobilize myself, because I'm experiencing the loneliness, which is taking me off of this state where I'm just in this steady state. I'm not wanting anything or desiring anything. I'm just am. But let's say now I'm lonely. I want to make contact. I pick up the phone. I reach out to Herb. Hey, Herb, you got a few minutes? Let's chat. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Let's kick this around. Now, what I do is I make contact with my environment to get my needs met. A lot of us sit there in our loneliness and saying, well, if Herb was a better friend, he would have called me this week. I mean, we sit there and then I got a resentment. Well, he's not. I'm going to have to get a better set of friends. Well, how about if I take responsibility for a one-on-one and call him? Now, let's say I call Herb. Herb, you available? He goes, God, Al, I'm doing this right now. I'm focusing on that. Now, if I experience my needs as demands, I'm going to get mad that he's not available to me. If I say, God, I was looking forward to talking to you, but it sounds like you're busy. When might you be free? Now I respect him. I respect myself. Or if I had a burning desire to share, I'm in a bad place. Would you be able to spend a few minutes? Look, I know Herb. He'd say, of course, Al. I could put this aside for a while. Let's talk. But it's my responsibility to ask him for what I want, not hope he's going to read my mind. So that part of when I am now moved, and that's why what Fritz was saying before about when you let the situation you're in control you, it doesn't mean to be passive. It means have a very active, proactive relationship with your experience.
That's the most important concept, a proactive relationship with your experience, which means that you got to stay conscious. Yes. One of my friends has this phrase, and it's so simple: pay attention.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Pay attention to your experience right now. Yeah. And we don't. So this homeostasis is what we're trying to achieve. We have this idea that my job is to always be in this steady state, and it's not. It's to be able to move off of that state, deal with what I need to do to get back there, right? It's whether or not I'm moving towards something I need or something I desire. It's to address that and then come back. But life is the movement between calmness and activation, right? serenity, and now desire. And how I relate to that and how I deal with that becomes a very, very important thing. And the more differentiated I am, the better I can do it.
Well, and think about just the real world, the natural world. I was thinking about this the other day. There are seasons. We're about to come up to a time change. There's cycles. There's planetary movements. I mean, this is the way that we're built. There's a tide, it goes out and it comes in, and it's influenced by the moon, for God's sakes. I know nothing about it. I'm not a scientist, but with us being 90% water, that's got to have some influence. I don't know what, Alan, what your response would be to something like that, because you are the scientist, but I'm sure there's some kind of behavioral influence in terms of just the seasons of the year and the cycles of day and night.
They've even described now the seasonally affective depression, right?
There
They
you
call
go.
it SAD.
There.
And we do know that we're a part of this and that we're influenced by a lot of things. And so you're right on with that. You know, I love the St. Francis prayer, because we could even call it the prayer of emotional sobriety in many ways.
Oh, absolutely.
But make sure when you read this prayer, and when you hear Herb read it now, if we're going to do that, is to listen to it from both sides. Listen to it from where there is hatred, may I bring love, right? So listen to it in terms of what we do out there in the world, but listen to it what you do in here in your world. Where you feel hatred within yourself, can you bring love? Where you see hatred in the world, can you bring love? So listen to this prayer from both sides. You want to read it, Herb?
Well, yeah, I would pray it, and I would invite you to pray it with me out loud, or you're all on mute, or quietly, or not at all, just with the idea that Alan just articulated about the relationship with reality in this format. And then we'll take some questions. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Eckhart, go ahead, Alan.
No, what I could just see, it's so powerful when you think about this personally too, is where I have doubt that I can bring faith to myself, where I make an error that I can bring truth to my error, where I feel discord, I can bring harmony to my discord, where I am wrong, I can bring a spirit of forgiveness to my wrongness. Where I feel hatred, I can bring love inside me. Where there are shadows in me, that I can bring light to those shadows. Where there's sadness, I can bring joy to myself, right? Where I seek comfort, or rather than that, I may speak rather to comfort than to be comforted. Where I learn how to comfort myself, to understand myself rather than to demand that everybody understands me. To love than to be loved. To learn how to love myself rather than expect somebody else to love me where I'm not. And, you know, if you turn this around, you will see the essence of emotional sobriety. It is to now give ourselves what we need in our life. And if we do it, then we can take the prayer and take it the other way and now give it to others. And as Herb said, it's a spiral. It goes back and forth. But we rarely think of this prayer in terms of our relationship with ourselves. And I want you to start thinking about that from now on, because it's a very important part of this. This is what Bill says. He goes, sobriety is only the bare beginning. And we know that. This is the emotional sobriety part. This is the next step in our recovery. He goes, it is only the first gift of the first awakening. And if more gifts are to be received, our awakening has to go on. That's what I hope you feel that we've been doing today, is continuing this awakening. And if it does go on, if our awakening goes on, we find that bit by bit, we can discard the old life, the one that was based on emotional dependence, the one that was based on this infantile grandiosity, the infantile ego, discard the old life, the one that didn't work, for a new life that can and does work. And this is the key to emotional sobriety, under any conditions whatever. That's the key here. We have an unshakable foundation for our lives, for our recovery. He goes, regardless of worldly success or failure, there's one way success and failure are the same, is that they're both temporary, by the way. Regardless of pain or joy, regardless of sickness or health, or even of death itself, he goes, a new life of endless possibilities can be lived if we are willing to continue our awakening. Emotional sobriety is the path to continue our awakening. This is information on how you can get in touch with Herb Kagan. He's got some great resources on his website. This is my contact information. I have some great resources on my website. That there is an emotional sobriety study area, and it's, I think, a very nominal fee, $12.99 a month. On 4D Publishing's website, you can join. If you do join, you have access to a bunch of videos that Herb has done on the steps. You have access to videos we've done together on emotional sobriety, ones that I've done. You've got access to a bunch of audio programs, some of which Herb and I have done together. You've got access to a whole day workshop, 2 of them that we've done out in Santa Clarita. It's a wealth of information. And once a month, and coming up in a week or so, I meet with the group for an hour on Thursday nights. And then in the month to come, I believe, Herb, you're going to also be meeting with the group. So it's a really active place. There's about 60 members to it. We hope to continue to grow that community and to study and learn about emotional sobriety together. So thank you for joining us today. We appreciate this. Without you here, it becomes a soliloquy between Herb and I.
Which we're quite happy to have.
Which we'll do anyway. Unfortunately, our narcissism has not been cured. We enjoy talking to each other about this.
First of all, thank you both very much. I'm so excited because I'm really starting to get this. I do want to ask Herb for an example of, you said you gave a suggestion when you are having a difficulty to determine the principle, take the high road and be generous. I'd love to hear an example of that.
Sure. I have somebody who has just resigned from their job, and the company is beginning to play games with him. And I said to this man, determine what the principle is in terms of your own personal integrity and rigorous honesty, and think in terms of the long run, in terms of your reputation and how you want to be feeling about yourself in a year. And then operate on that basis, making your decisions as to how you're going to handle their small-mindedness and or their greed. So to determine, principles are either guidelines or guardrails, depending on what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And, the other key in this one would be not to take that personally.
Oh, for sure.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you, see, as soon as you take that personally, now it gets into look at all I've done for them. How can they treat me like
That
this?
was the beginning of our conversation.
You could see there where the importance of to separate that, and that's
Right.
not an easy thing to do. We say it flippantly, like don't take it personally. It takes work to get there.
Yes.
It takes a lot of work to get there, and to really, really be able to put yourself and see what the other person is doing and what's going on. But that's a key to being able to develop. The second response that he talked about is getting in that space between.
Yeah.
And now deciding who you want to be and how you want to handle it,
Yes.
and not letting what they're doing determine what you're doing.
Yes.
See, so that we get past being a tit for tat, or having a tit for tat mentality. If you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying it's not okay to hit somebody. If you got to protect yourself, you got to protect yourself. But there's other times when somebody's doing something and I don't need to follow that path. I can be my own person and decide how I want to handle it.
Yeah. Both short term and long term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't think long term.
Correct. Right. Most of the time.
Herb, I appreciate your description of the meditation and its integration with the intention to apply, improve your conscious contact. I'm struggling a little bit, and I'm looking for any comments, because I'm a long-term practitioner of a meditation practice that goes to what you warned against, which that was the no mind meditation, or the transcendent meditation, where
Right.
conscious thought stops and I just am in sort of a non-conscious thinking state, which helps my blood pressure. And like you said, it has physiological benefits that you acknowledged.
Right.
So should I do a separate meditation practice where I'm
just understand the difference, because what you're calling meditation is your practice is actually contemplation. There's a formal term for that is totally distinct from meditation. Meditation is the use of my mind consciously to direct and hear guidance. The point of what your meditation practice is, as you call meditation, is contemplation, coming from the Latin phrase templare, meaning temple space, to sit in the presence of the divine, in the cathedral of the spirit, in the mosque of the holy, whatever it is, that which is the Buddhist practice and most of the practices that come out of the East, which is this distance from the mind, this emptiness and this silence. That's called contemplation, a very different practice. And I've incorporated that later on in my practice as part integrated with my prayer, then my meditation, then my contemplation practice. All of it, as I call it in my book, Practicing the Here and Now, I call it intentional consciousnness. So no, don't change a thing. First of all, is it working for you? And of course, you said, I'm intuiting, yes, it does work for you. So don't change a thing, but be conscious that there's a difference between prayer, which is talking, meditation, which is listening, and contemplation, which is sitting in the sunlight to get a tan.
Thank you.
Yeah? Did that help?
Absolutely helped. I understand the difference.
Thank you very much. Great question.
Gosh, been going through a lot of transformation myself, a lot of work, a lot of hard work internally, looking at a lot of past trauma that I wasn't even aware of for so much of my life. And also developing a new relationship with Jamie here, and learning how to have love without strings attached and love without obligations, like it talks about in the Keys to the Kingdom. And I guess the question lies somewhere in there, uncovering all these connections that I have to coping mechanisms that I developed throughout my life, and learning how to dispel those and come to peace with those, and also find that balance of maintaining an interdependency between us, and learning to let go of those codependencies. And is that even truly possible to achieve at some point, or is it just part of the process and that we go through?
Alan.
Well, first of all, great to see you, and nice meeting you. Ben is coordinated and organized the 2 workshops I was mentioned to you about that we have recorded, and it was always great coming up there and spending time in Santa Clarita with you. And I look forward to ways we can do that in the future. So I know you're doing some cool and neat things up there. So I want to maybe even give you a chance to say something about that. But look, I think you said it at the end, Ben, is these are great things to strive for. And I think for us humans, having no conditions, right? That unconditional love that we all would love to have. It's a great idea. It's a great goal. And I think it's important to strive for it. I think we got to be careful to think we're going to pull it off perfectly, right? It's that curse of perfection. And so, you know, Bill gave us the tool is to unhook these conditions when they pop up. When we realize them, that's how I think we get closer and closer to that kind of an experience in our relationship is to say, look, you know, unfortunately, out of my unconscious, there's going to be expectations I have that I'm not even aware of now that are going to show up in our relationship. And, you know, please, I hope that how I deal with that is going to define who I am, not the fact I have them. And see, that's the big important thing, right? How do I deal with these when they show up? You know, if I sprinkle a bunch of you know, humble fairy dust on them, then they're going to dissipate and they're not going to control me. But if, you know, if they are really touching a deep infantile, you know, wound or longing that I think my partner has to fix, I may be caught in it for a while and resentful and mad and hung up. And that's okay, as long as I keep this attitude, what's going on with me that this is so important, right? And if I can get down to understanding, you know, the roots and causes of these things, it can help me grow myself and work through some issues. With my wife at times, you know, I have this demand that she listens to me. Well, it goes into a childhood wound of not being heard, you know, and that's my job when it shows up. I'd like her to listen to me, but, you know, sometimes she's got stuff going on in her life. It's not all about me. Damn it. Right. But see, that's the other part. Damn it. It's not all, I want it to be all about me at times. But then there's another part of me that knows, all right, Alan, the adult Alan comes in and says, okay, little Alan, it doesn't have to be. But that's my job to deal with that stuff. But man, Ben, I love you, buddy. I wish I could give you a big hug, man.
Thank you.
Well, and one of the operating principles that's really confrontive and just really harsh, it's never them.
Right.
It's never them.
Right.
It's always my reaction to them. I mean, that has so helped me to not react or not defend. It's never them.
Understood.
Hard stuff.
Yeah. 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 I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ben, very much.
My question is for Alan. You said so many times during this workshop, and this is the first time I maybe hear it. You probably said it before. I just heard it the first time. Act for yourself without being selfish. Act for someone else without being selfless. So if you can expand on how can we recognize where are we being selfish or selfless? Like, I mean, how can we, like, it's about balance. It's about acting in a balanced way. But that distinction is difficult for a recovering overeater, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I'll try to give it an example, and I hope it doesn't seem too menial, because, you know, look, you know, people come to me all the time and says, you know, I don't think this is a big issue, but we're fighting over it. And what I tell people all the time, every issue is a negotiation of how much individuality and togetherness we're going to have in our relationship, right? So any conflict is really negotiating that. So the subject is never the subject. right? There's always something more important going on underneath. And I'm going to talk about the hamburger now. So I like my hamburgers medium rare. I like to have that red meat in the middle of it, and nothing like a hamburger cooked meat, especially when it's Kobe beef. A Kobe beef medium rare hamburger, I'm in heaven. I mean, nothing gets better than that for me. So my lovely wife likes to cook everything extra well done.
Oh.
Well, there's a conflict, right? I want my stuff medium rare, so sometimes she'll think of it being medium rare for me, but her habitual way of doing it is just to cook it. So the other day, she overcooked a burger, and I was going to be speaking at an NA meeting, and I had a little bit of a time crunch. So she was really nice. She got everything prepared for dinner and stuff like that. And I come in and I'm ready for my medium rare Kobe beef hamburger. And what I see sitting on the plate was not a medium rare. I think it was a hamburger at some point, but now it's this cooked thing that you could probably use as shuriken to kill somebody, right? It's that cooked, right? It's that cooked. And sometimes I like things cooked like that, but not my hamburger. So I said to her, look, and I was trying to stand for myself without being selfish. I said, look, I would like my burgers cooked medium rare. She goes, oh, well, there you go, criticize. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just asking for what I want. So just, I want to be clear. And look, if you don't have time, you don't have to do it. See, there's me trying not to be selfish. It's okay. I can throw it on and do it. You don't feel like you have to do it for me. If you don't have time to stay on top of it, I know there's a lot of other things going on for you. So it's not like I'm faulting you for it. I'm just saying that's what I'd like. So that's where I was trying to stand for myself, but not being selfish about it and saying you've got to do it regardless of what's going on for you. I'd like this. Now, so that was me trying to find that balance between us. I don't know if that helps, but that's
very
Berger.
clear, yeah.
That's Berger on burgers.
Yes.
My question today is not very highbrow, I'm afraid. Not very well formed, but I'm going through a situation at the moment and I'm on this workshop. So I thought, hell, I'll take the opportunity. So I left a toxic relationship a year ago, but was unable to let the guy go because I didn't want to, because for the most part, he's wonderful, kind, caring, considerate, but he's also an untreated alcoholic and can be a real Jekyll and Hyde character. I haven't seen much of the Jekyll in the last year, which kind of kept me thinking that maybe things had changed. The Jekyll reappeared this week. So I have made a decision to finally leave, say goodbye. I mean, I've already left. It's just I haven't been able to accept my decision. What I want to ask you, I mean, like there were two things that jumped out at me. Well, a lot of things jumped out at me on the workshop today, but two things. One was about mature love, which is union with integrity. And the quote from Byron Katie, it only takes one clear person to have a good relationship. So like, how much do I try? Do I go to CODA, go to Al-Anon, go to my AA in order to be able to manage a relationship with someone who doesn't understand what I'm talking about, is emotionally immature and is suffering without wanting a solution? Or do I just say, listen, I'm sorry, enough is enough, I'm gone?
Dr. Berger.
Well, let me try to, there's so many parts to that question.
There are, that's right.
So look, first of all, I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable with us and share that, because, you're, and I think you know this, but I'll just say it out loud, you're really talking about your dilemma, not him. And so it's important for you to know that, because you were very articulate about what his problem was. You just listed three things off. They rolled off your tongue. They were well-cited verses, right? But see, that's our problem at times. And that's the issue is, when I polarize with someone and say, well, you're toxic and I'm not, that's the heart of the problem for me, is I'm saying they're the problem. And they're not the problem. The issue is I don't know how to meet what's going on with them in a good way to where I can still feel okay. We don't need to make anybody a problem in that. It's I see this in treatment programs all the time, and Herb knows what I'm going to talk about. So they got a patient that's struggling. The team will get together with someone and say, obviously you don't want to get well. Wait a minute. They came into your program. What are you blaming the patient for being a patient? I mean, that's the dilemma they got. They don't know how to get well. That's why they're there. Now, the truth is the treatment program may not know how to treat that person because they don't have the experience, the skill level, the know-how, etc. But if we quit blaming and we just start to think about experience, so you might be saying, look, there's something that goes on in this relationship with him that I just don't know how to deal with well and still feel okay about myself. You see what I'm saying? If you define the issue as that, then you could say, I want to stick around and learn it, or I don't, I'm not able to, I just feel bad all the time. That's a good enough reason to leave. Because, you know, what I will tell you, and you know this, you're going to have to confront this lesson at some point anyway. So whether this is going to be your guru or you find someone else to be your guru that's going to help you figure this out, they're going to come in your life because the issue is with you, not with them. This is reflecting your developmental stage. And now whoever you're not that would help you deal with this is always going to keep coming back in as a manifestation of trouble. And your opportunity is to use that trouble to try to grow yourself so that you can hold on to yourself and be okay regardless of what they're doing. That's easier said than done. There's no shame if you say, I got to throw in the towel on this one. It's too big of a lesson for me now. I got to do some further work on myself to get there. That's okay too. But you don't need to label them as the, you know what I mean, as toxic and all that other nonsense, which then diffuses your power and your ability to grow in this thing. So that's what I would say to you is this is a great opportunity for you to figure out what you need to do to take the next step in your life, whether it's staying engaged or with this person or not. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you talked about meditation, contemplation, and I'm having trouble getting my mind kind of wrapped around the meditation. I'm thinking I do centering prayer.
Yes, that's contemplation.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought, is that that's contemplation, because that's not, I mean, that's sitting in the presence of God.
Correct.
And so meditation, I also do, you know, I mean, like traditional meditation, but I walk every morning before the sun.
I'm going to stop you for a minute. When you say I do traditional meditation, what is it that you mean by traditional meditation?
And actually that was incorrect, because I don't do traditional meditation anymore. I do centering prayer. And I've always called, when I'm trying to explain it to people, I call it meditation on steroids. But because I'm using the popular cultural definition of meditation.
Yes, I understand it without complicating it. That would be a great way just to handle it and support it. The definitions that I give glibly, not too scientifically, but prayer is when I'm talking, meditation is when I'm listening, and contemplation when I'm using my will in a state of openness to the presence. I use my body to pray, I use my mind to think, meditate, and I use my will to contemplate in an act of love. All right, so that's oversimplicity, but it for right now, you had some other comments and or questions that you wanted to make.
I think that what you mean by meditation is what I do. I get out early in the morning and walk with my dog, and I sort of just let it be. I try to focus on my breath and focus on mind, body, soul, heart being all together. But I think.
Why?
I come up with ideas.
Why? I mean, it sounds wonderful, but what's your purpose in doing that?
Nope. I mean, there isn't a purpose. It's just,
Oh, no, there is a purpose.
okay.
Well, why are you coming? You're doing it.
I mean, it's my conscious contact with God.
Oh, well, there you go. That's meditation.
Because what I say is I walk my dog and God walks me.
Yep,
I walk in the morning.
100%.
So that-
Allowing the flow and listening to the flow, that's meditation.
And what's so revelatory to me of what you said is that I have always kind of looked at the thoughts that come up in my mind during that walk as being of me and of no merit.
Oh.
And what I heard you say today is that the thoughts that are coming up may be what Bill calls intuitive thoughts, and they may be inspiration from God. They may be the Holy Spirit working, moving through me. And that I shouldn't just say, oh, that AJ, that's, that's
No,
just.
no, more often than not, especially where you have a centering prayer practice, more often than not, no, those will be nudgings of the Spirit.
I love that, nudging of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I do. I facilitate the second Wednesday and the fourth Wednesday of the month, the centering prayer group. What state do you live in?
In Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah, so you're basically on the same time zone. So Tanya will make sure that you get the information on our centering prayer group.
I would love that. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah, that became an integrated part of my practice about a year or two after, as I just discussed and understood meditation. Then I met Father Thomas Keating, and he trained me in centering prayer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I'm trying to practice the things that you talked about and become less encumbered by how my partner acts. What if there's a practical aspect that sort of interferes in that? Say, one thing that we argue about a lot is that he says he'll do stuff a lot that he says okay or yes and agrees and then doesn't do it. And say that ends up being, say, like pay the mortgage or the bills or something that reflects on both, our credit and,
Right.
important stuff.
Sure.
So that's one question. And the other one is, when do you discern when it's good or wise to speak up about something? Like if there's sort of an ongoing family issue where I have learned mostly to just pause for a really, really long time, not react as much and all that. But I also have a history of not saying a lot of stuff because of wanting people's approval. And sometimes I feel like I'm shutting up in times where maybe it would be okay to not say something angrily, but to say something as neutrally as possible that's factual. And I don't know, I get confused at that too.
Yeah. I'm sure Dr. Berger would be better at answering the question about relationships. That's his real specialty in his therapy practice. But taking the first one with regard to the mortgage, of course, is I'm hearing the echoes in the Al-Anon rooms. I went to Al-Anon for about 6 months when I was 10 years sober. So I've got kind of an exposure to their principles, their operating principles. And that is, what's your responsibility in terms of the mortgage payment? You don't need to answer these questions, but they are questions. What's your responsibility in the mortgage situation? It sounded like that's your expectations of his responsibility, but now your experience is that he doesn't pay it. So you can either take on the responsibility or let him suffer the consequences of not following through on the responsibility. You don't get to bitch about it. Yeah.
I hear that, and what has come up a lot with the various things is that I'm kind of already overwhelmed with what I have to handle. And so one side was going, well, if he can't do it, then you start taking on all the things that he says he's going to do that he doesn't do. And I'm just already overwhelmed, but yet he doesn't do it. It doesn't just affect him. It affects me and my credit and all that stuff.
I understand. Yeah. Well, somebody's got to do it and or pay the price of it not being done. So you figure it out, and maybe you hire a bookkeeper that actually does it and is paid to do that. Yeah. So you're expecting him to change. You're expecting him to be different, and he isn't changing, and he's not going to be different. And he's never going to be different unless he chooses to get into some kind of an accountability where he is committing to be different and then has got some kind of tools to be different. Nobody's going to change. Nobody's going to change on their own. They don't change. Don't expect it because it's the right thing to do or because they said they would. Yeah. When they don't do it once, okay. If they don't do it twice, that's your problem, not his. Yeah. Then with regard to the other thing was in the hospital program 37 years ago, I remember them saying about good communication. Tell them what you see objectively. Tell them the impact of what you see on you. No blame. You're just describing the impact. Tell them what you want. You see, then it's not about them. It's not about blame. It's not about shame. It's about me communicating. But as Alan mentioned, don't expect anybody to read your mind or be intuitive or love you enough. They should know better. That's just not how it works. And you already said that you have I heard anyway, it might not be true, a family of origin condition pattern of not speaking up for yourself, right? A little bit, okay. And so, as I understand it, there's a difference between being aggressive and being assertive. They both mean taking care of yourself. One is doing it respectfully. And you need to take care of yourself by letting people know what your needs are. Yeah. Yeah. Nobody's coming. You are the one that you are waiting for to show up. It's like so brilliant, a kind of like, and very, very hard. Alan said, oh, we can be very glib about all this stuff and give you principles and lots of words. None of this is easy. None of this is easy, but it's all very doable. The word I use to describe my life for the last 32 years is my life has flourished. And when I did the study on happiness about 5 years ago, the primary book out by the head of the positive psychology group is called Flourish. I really highly recommend that you become acquainted, if you're interested more in the psychological aspect of this, read Dr. Seligman, Seligman, his book on Flourish. It's phenomenal. I mean, it dovetails with what we're talking about, with also the experience and the formulas of the 12-step process.
Gosh, first of all, I mean, since I've gone through the 12 steps with you a couple of times in Los Angeles through your program, and it changed my life. I came in because I was worried about my marriage. Yep. And I was waiting for you to, I knew you were going to show me how I could fix him and all the things that I was very clear were wrong with him. And I did figure out and learn your wisdom, the program's wisdom. And so when I worked on myself, he amazingly became the man I fell in love with again. Wow. So thank you for that. And so much more.
That's a great comment and witness to the impact of this process, though. That's right. Yeah.
So my specific question is on step 8, because I'm looking at it now through the lens of Al-Anon, and I am a classic, feminine pleaser. I've lived my life trying, working very hard to be the perfect student, child, wife,
Mhm.
friend, all of that, and completely lost myself.
Yes.
And so when I get to this question of, listing harms, who did I diminish? What did I do? What harm did I cause?
Right.
And I'm concerned that my only answer is the person I hurt with respect to my mother was myself. The person that I hurt with respect to my older brother was myself. I mean, by just tripping over myself and to please them and letting them take full advantage of me,
Yeah.
not being cared for at the end of the day,
Yeah.
learning for this program how to care for myself. But I'm missing something? Because so far my list of step 8 is I haven't harmed anyone, and that can't be right. I get that I'm not perfect.
Well, at this point in your development, it might be okay because you may have already cleaned up what the mess was earlier. So it may be okay. The answer is manifold here. Inevitably, you have hurt yourself and need to participate in a forgiveness process, maybe even a ritual for yourself. I think step 9, making amends to other people, gives us a lot of sense of being released ourselves or forgiving ourselves. When we bring healing to other people, we are healed.
Right.
At the same time, though, to address what you just asked directly, if you have any doubt about whether or not you owe an amends to your mother, ask her. If you have any doubt with regard to your brother, ask him.
Interesting.
Well, I'm not a mind reader. It's kind of like, this would be, if you were my mother, I would say, Mom, we've had lots of conversations about the past. I'm in a 12-step program. I do inventory periodically. I want to stay really conscious, and I want to have really vital, healthy relationships.
Right.
I'm not sure whether or not I've diminished you or hurt you in any way. Is there something that you would like to talk about with me about that?
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you, Herb.
But at the same time, and I'm going to pull back just a little bit because I don't know you exactly well. You might be a perfectionist. Half of the people I talk to are, and they will take a huge oversense of responsibility for other people's. And,
Right.
Yeah, I suspect. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying on substantial relationships, mothers and fathers and partners and siblings, but for friends and acquaintances and probably not, because you're just being a pest now. All right. You're just being a pest, but it could be true for relatives and substantial relationships. If you in prayer feel that you've already really got things pretty well cleaned up, then talk to your sponsor about it and come to an agreement as to whether it's worthwhile or not. And possibly if it's been 3 or 4 or 5 years since you've had any conversations with your substantial person, it might be worthwhile in an informal way. Don't make an appointment. Don't do anything dramatic. But if you're having coffee or taking a walk someday, says, "Oh, by the way, are we clean?"
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
It's a great question because you do want to stay balanced and you do want to stay clean. And we don't know that we don't know, and we can't see that we don't see, even when we are many years in the program. Tanya, please.
Yes, Herb. One of the slides that you put out today was about the integration between, for the body, it's physical sobriety, for the mind, it's emotional sobriety, and you had for the will, it's spiritual sobriety.
That's my terminology, yes.
Right, and I love that. I love it. And from my question is, we covered a lot of emotional sobriety today, and it was wonderful. Talk to us about spiritual sobriety. Is it about having this practice? Like what do you mean by spiritual sobriety? I mean, we can have it practiced, but we don't need to be, it doesn't mean we're spiritually sober. Yeah.
What I mean specifically by it is the proper use of the will. The proper use of the mind is emotional sobriety. And I'm making arbitrary decisions and definitions, but the proper use of the mind and emotions is emotional sobriety. The proper use of the will is step 11 and step 12. I am saying to the God of my not understanding, thy will be done in conscious contact. Thy will be done. I'm using my free will to say thy will. I'm not being passive. I'm being ferociously active because I want to be in alignment. That's my decision to continue to be and to maintain and sustain my alignment. And in step 12, the guidelines for that staying in alignment are the principles, especially about helping other people. I've made a decision with my free will that I'm going to use a large amount of my personal time and energy to help other people. That's what I mean by spiritual sobriety.
Oh, I love it. So it comes full circle because you always say we need to live in step 10, 11, and 12.
Yeah.
And 10 is emotional sobriety, and 11 and 12 is spiritual sobriety.
You know, and you're correct. I have never explained it this way and in this detail. But that's what my intent was. And thank you for pressing the button to unpack it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's pray the serenity prayer, which is that prayer. What can I influence? What can't I influence? I just need wisdom to navigate life. I can't control anything, but I have a responsibility to influence what I can. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. And wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody. Wonderful, wonderful day. And there's more.